Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to the first Children and Family Scrutiny Board for 25-26. A big introduction for myself, I think, first of all. It's my first meeting as chair of this committee. I have been on it before as a member, and I did sit in once very briefly as part of the meeting as a chair of it. So I have to say it's my favourite committee. I have a... And for those who don't know me, by the way, my name is Billy Flynn. I'm a councillor for Adlam Wharfdale. I've had a very long interest in the care and support that the council supplies to vulnerable children in particular, but also the impact it has on the families of children who've got additional needs of any description at all. So I'm delighted to see that there are already a number of issues on the agenda over the next sort of 12 months, the working programme over the next 12 months, which is only a working document at the moment. We will cover it later on. I would like to sort of just really emphasise that if there's anything the members want to put on this board or to bring to the board, then by all means, bring it to our attention, Rob's attention, and we'll give it our full attention. So, okay. Right, I've introduced myself. If we now go around the board, the table to my left.
Thank you, Chair.
Nikki.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nikki Diol. I'm Head of Legal Services and I will be advising this board.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Asghar Khan, Councillor for Burma Toffs and Richmond Hill Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Karen Renshaw, Marsden Robin Hood Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Oliver Edwards, representing Guernsey and Rawdon wards.
Tony Britton, representing the Roman Catholic Diocese in Leeds, and yet to be confirmed.
Yet to be confirmed.
Confirmed.
Oh well. So I'm Councillor David Jenkins from Kenneback and Seacroft Ward.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Jones. I represent the ward of Horsforth, and I'm substituting for Councillor Heselwood this morning.
Good morning, Andrew Graham, representing the Church of England Diocese.
Good morning, I'm Helen Bellamy and I'm a school staff representative.
Good morning, John Garvani, Councillor Horsforth Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Nkela Manaka for Bemontos and Richmond Hill.
Good morning, I'm Emma Flynn, a councillor in Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Helen Hayden, Executive Member for Children and Families.
Good morning, I'm Julie Longworth and I'm Director for Children and Families.
Good morning, I'm Rebecca McCormack, I'm Chief Officer for Education.
Good morning, I'm Farah Khan, I'm Deputy Director for Children's Social Care.
Good morning, I'm Phil Evans, I'm the Deputy Director for Resources and Transformation.
Good morning, Kate Black, a co-opted member.
I'm Mary Adams, I'm Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Good morning, this is Anna Spinnett, Governor Representative.
Good morning, Councillor Tim Goodall from Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Morning, Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden Ward.
Morning, everyone. I'm Rob Clayton. I'm the Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
And just a plea from the elderly chairman this end of the board. I wonder if you could ensure that your microphones are brought as close as you can to you. It is quite difficult up this end of the room to hear everybody, apart from the fact that I'm half deaf, but we'll make the best of it as we sort of go along. Just before we start, Julie, as you probably are aware, Ofsted are now in, looking at children's services. Would you just like to give us a brief update on where you are? Surprised to see you, actually, given the pressure you'll be under for the next week or so.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Well, we would never miss scrutiny. Business goes on, business as usual, and this is a key part, of the governance for children and families. It was featured in the 2022 inspection report, and it's continued to be very welcomed by the Directorate and a very robust scrutiny. The inspection has commenced, as you have said. It is a 2-week inspection. It is a short inspection. Because we are a local authority that is rated as good or outstanding, and when you are a local authority rated as good or outstanding, you have a slightly different inspection process. So we're in our first week. A lot of activity, as you can imagine, in terms of submitting information to the inspectorate, liaising in terms of timetables, which is no small feat in a city the size of Leeds. And lots of activity going on across the city, and the inspectors will be with us on site next week, and we're really looking forward to that. We're looking forward to showing the inspectors, you know, our strengths, the really excellent practice that goes on across the city, and our areas for improvement, you know, because what we know, and we have said it here on many occasions, you know, outstanding is a one-word judgment, but we know in any local authority, but especially in a local authority, a core city the size of Leeds, there is always more to do, and we're never complacent, and we're always very conscious of our areas of development as well as the areas that we want to celebrate. It's a partnership approach, you know, I think it's really important for me to say that. Children's Services, you know, could not provide effective help and protection to children and families, you know, across the city without the support of our partners, and within that, you know, children, families, parents, you know, young people themselves. So thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Julie, and I'm sure I certainly wish you the best of luck over the next few weeks, and I'm sure the rest of the board too. Very good luck with it. Okay, thanks very much. Rob, would you like to take us through items 1 to 5, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The standard items of business taken each scrutiny board. Item 1, Chair, is appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents, and there are no appeals against refusals today, Chair. Item 2 is items for exclusion of the press or public, and there are no items that follow that criteria today, Chair. Item 3 is late items of business, and there are no late items. Item 4 is declarations of interest, and I will briefly pause to allow any elected members to declare any. I shall take silence as none. And then item 5, Chair, is apologies, and today we have apologies from Councillor Heselwood with Councillor Jones attending as a substitute, as already noted. And then we have apologies from 2 of our co-opted members, Nick Tones and Shanaz Gull. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. On to item 6, the minutes of the last meeting. I wasn't there, but I'd like to continue, I think, a process that Dan Cohen introduced as chairman, which is to go through each of the go through the minutes, obviously, go through the minutes of the last meeting, obviously, but then ask for a proposal and second at the end of it. And I intend to do that on each of the items on the agenda today, so that we're absolutely clear that everybody is happy or unhappy, for that matter, with what we've decided to go through. So it's the minutes start on page 7 of the papers. Any comments on page 1? Any comments on page 2? On page 3? On page 4? On page 5? On page 6, on page 7, on page 8, on page 9, on page 10, page 11, and page 12.
I'm not sure I'm on the same page 12 as you, but I was on...
page 18, I think it is, on the papers.
Oh, sorry, I meant I was on page 12 of the whole document, sorry, so I missed it. But I just wanted to bring up the fact that I asked in the last board about the comparison with core cities on early years performance for those on free school meals, and then we got that information after the meeting, and it shows that Leeds is on 46.1% of pupils reaching a good level versus 53% in the core cities on average. It looks like the gap closed a bit in 2023. Sorry, you did... Oh, sorry, Master Rising, sorry. Sorry, I started. So, so it looked like the gap closed a little with core cities in 2023, but then it got slightly wider again in 2024. It looks like it's a matter of concern. Do we have any kind of explanation for that? I know we talked at the last meeting about what we're doing, but is there any comment on that?
Thank you. I'm happy to come.
Who'd like to take that one?
Happy to come in. I think it does fluctuate. I think really that does reflect the challenges of a core city. There's core cities and then there's core cities. I've worked in a number of core cities, and they are all individual. Although there are comparators, there's also quite distinct differences in relation to those cities, which I think do add to the progress then that children, and families make across a whole range of outcomes. I think what I would highlight in Leeds in particular, I suppose, is the significant growth that we have had in the child population per se, the significant growth that we've also had in adolescence, the fact that the majority of that growth has taken place in our inner city areas of highest deprivation. And then what you have, I suppose, is the intersectionality of issues that impact on children in children's lives. So I suppose what I would highlight is it's something that we are very conscious of, narrowing the gap, I suppose, creating improvement in outcomes at pace and at a quicker pace for children who are most disadvantaged is set out in our Children and Young People's Plan. We're absolutely committed to that. I think the comparisons are helpful with core cities, but what I would say is we are all very, very individual. And I've never worked anywhere with the complexity and the diversity and the demand really that we've got in Leeds.
Any other matters arising? Members, no. Rob, I think you had one. Bring up.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just briefly, minute 102, which was the Further Education in Leeds Working Group outcome. Just to note that the correspondence was sent to Mayor Braben as part of the recommendations from last time, and I have had a holding reply, so once I have the full response, I will obviously, through the Chair, share with board members.
Thanks very much, Rob. Moving on to item 7, co-opted members. Would you like to run through that for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So each June, each scrutiny board of the council considers a report on co-opted members for the forthcoming municipal year. This offers an opportunity for the board to consider any additional expertise or knowledge that they could co-opt onto the board. Each board can appoint up to 5 non-voting co-opted members for a period of the municipal year, and there's also provision for up to 2 non-voting co-opted members as part of a specific inquiry, so to bring, I guess, subject matter expertise to a particular issue. On the Children and Families Board, we do have some legislative requirements which are brought largely through the Local Government Act 2000, where we have a number of education representatives, one from the Church of England, one from the diocese, the Catholic Diocese of Leeds, and there are also parent-governor regulations within the Act that also allow up to 3 parent-governor co-opted members on this board. The 5 co-opted members are referenced in the 5 non-voting co-opted members are referenced in the report. The proposal is that the 5 continue, and that is part of the recommendations. The 2 religious representatives for the Church of England and the Catholic Diocese. Prior to publication of the agenda, I didn't receive the nomination from the diocese, so with the Chair's permission, we may need to slightly adjust those recommendations so that those 2 are formally voted and appointed to the board. And that would be the usual or long-standing representative Tony Britton, who has been on the board for, well, as long as I can recall, and over 10 years, I think, so I'm sure Tony will know that. But with that, Chair, and with the proposal to add in a recommendation, which I have noted down. So it would be to revise recommendation B, which would now read, note the nominations from the Church of England and Roman Catholic Diocese to the Children and Family Scrutiny Board in accordance with the statutory requirements, and that would be Tony Britton and Andrew Graham.
Right. Any comments?
Could I move an amended recommendation, Chair, that we amend recommendation B to include the name Tony Britton as the Roman Catholic Diocese representative?
Can we have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Renshaw. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to item 8, which is terms of reference for the board. Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, another item we take in June. It's my my day in the sun is this meeting where I get to present a number of reports. So this is the Scrutiny Board's terms of reference for the 25-26 municipal year. Appendix 1 sets out the procedurals for all Scrutiny Boards that apply to all 5 on the Council. Appendix 2 sets out Article 6, which governs Scrutiny Boards and is within the Constitution is Article 6. And then Appendix 3 sets out the remits for all 5 Scrutiny Boards, and obviously as part of that the Children and Families Board features in there. The terms of reference, these matters are considered by all Scrutiny Boards at the June cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. Can I propose then that members note the terms of reference as they relate to the Scrutiny Board? Can I have a seconder? Councillor Stevenson.
Can we have a vote on it?
Yeah.
Can we have a vote on it, please? There's a seconder. Can we go back to agenda item 7, because there was an amendment to the motion and a seconder, and there was no substantial vote on that item. So if we could just go back as a matter of procedure to the item that predates the agenda item 8. So agenda item 7 in relation to the co-opted members. You have a motion on the table that's been amended. Could that please go to the vote?
All in favour? Anyone against? Abstentions? Carried.
And then can we do the same for...
Please, yeah.
And then can we do the same for agenda item 8 with regards to the terms of reference? We've had a proposer by Chair and a seconder, and those now it's to the vote, to you as a board.
All in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? It's carried. Thanks very much, Nikki. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, which is the work programme. This is very much a working document. Rob, some of the stuff's been carried over from last year. Rob and I have been discussing it over the last few weeks. We've discussed with officers from Children and Families, but it's very much a working document, and there have already been a number of suggestions about whether we should change, move back or move forward one or two of the items. So I'm very keen that members and officers, for that matter, of this board propose whatever they would like us to discuss during the course of the year. We'll obviously have to take advice on whether or not it falls within the remit of the board. But basically, it's as sort of as it stands now over the next sort of 12 months or so. Does anybody have any comments at this particular stage? Councillor Downs.
Thanks, Chair. For the July meeting, or as soon as possible afterwards, to scrutinise the decision that goes to Exec Board next month with the area based review of school closures, school provision.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Downs. Yes, in consultation with colleagues in the Directorate, I will seek to bring the Exec Board report to our July meeting. Thank you.
That's certainly our intention, Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. I note that there's various items around SEND and EHCPs, but there isn't a particular item about SEND transport post-16, and I know that's been a major item of concern, certainly in my email inbox, and I know in other people's as well. So I wondered if there could be some discussion of that.
I think it's in the inboxes of all the parties, everybody, because a number of councillors have approached me sort of individually about it. I don't think there's any doubt we will be discussing it at some stage during the course of this year. Okay.
Hello. I just wondered if we can include some engagement with children and young people over the year, whether that's directly in this meeting or in working groups. I think it's something we didn't do brilliantly last year.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Councillor Flint, yes. There was a little bit of a pilot last year on the work experience item where I met with the Youth Council and brought some information from there into a report we considered. Yes, that's something I can look to develop with the Voice, Influence and Change team. There are some initial discussions actually on that work experience theme that I've already had, but obviously open to wider comments and through the Chair to come up with a subject that we can take forward. So yes, that's fine.
Sort of link to that, Councillor Flint, I'm very keen that we have external bodies coming in where it's appropriate for them to come in. And one of the items, I think, post-16 in particular, post-16 send transport costs in particular, I've been approached personally by the heads of the Silks. I know Julie has had sort of correspondence, and individual members have been as well. And if it's thought appropriate, I think it's entirely right that we should invite people in who've got experience of this, not just ourselves as elected members or officers who have to implement the policy and all the rest of it, that we should see what the results are from the perspective of young people, children and their families. Okay? I'll remember to take a vote on it this time, Nikki. Can we have a proposal, please, for the work programme? Councillor Evans? Yes. Seconder? Councillor Downs, thank you very much indeed. Can we have a vote? All in favour of the recommendation? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Carried unanimously. Okay, on to item 10, which is the lessons learned paper. I mean, basically, I'm not quite sure whether Julie or Councillor Hayden would like to sort of start on this before we move on to the paper itself. But Councillor Hayden, thank you.
Yeah, I'll open up the discussion. So this is the Queensway Lessons Learned, which provides a reflection on the recent school organisation process concerning Queensway Primary School. So drawing on a range of feedback, it reviews governance, statutory duties, consultation, communication and equality considerations with the aim of supporting ongoing development and how we approach future proposals. This work takes place against a national backdrop of falling primary pupil numbers, which we are seeing across the city, with higher incidents of falling places in some parts of the city. And the challenges that oversupply places present for local authorities, which is a national thing, as I said, and many local authorities are dealing with it across the country. The issue raised through this process, such as consultation timelines, equality impact assessment and communication, have been considered carefully. The learning set out here is designed to help strengthen our processes in recognition of the current challenges around oversupply of school places. There's a forward-looking piece of work built on the learning that has been identified and focused on ensuring continuous improvement in the school organisation process. I'll leave it there. Do you want to say?
Julie?
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Finn. Just to add, really, that the report's coming today as agreed by Scrutiny at its meeting on the 28th of April. It's important to be clear, that this is a learning lessons review into the process itself and not in relation to the proposal that was made in respect of Queensway. And I think it's important for us just to clarify that. It does make a number of recommendations. I think as I set out perhaps at the response to your first question this morning, Councillor Flynn, the importance of us being open to learning, being a learning organisation. Part of that is about taking feedback We have had stakeholder views which were captured during the consideration of the original proposal in relation to Queensway, which have also informed this learning activity, albeit that the focus of that really was on local authority officers, who oversaw the process. But there's some recommendations, clear recommendations, and they will also be taken forward to a future exec board report. Thank you.
Rebecca, would you like to say anything about the report?
I don't think there's anything to add on top of Councillor Hayden and Julie. Thanks.
Nikki.
Can I just remind members that any line of questioning that is put to officers is through the content of this report and the table that presents only.
Thanks very much indeed, Nikki. Just before we move on to ask for comments and questions, etc., I don't want it answered necessarily now, but during the course of the subject, if you could perhaps come back on it. The lessons learned papers obviously is a fairly comprehensive one. I just wanted to be assured that all of the advice that we were given subsequently, which led to the decision being rescinded, has been taken on board and is reflected in the lesson learned paper, basically. We'll discuss it later on, basically. But has anybody else got any comments or questions about the paper? Councillor Downs.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things. One is, well, a few things. One is that obviously I was one of the contributors to this review because as a ward member I expressed my concerns over the process. It's good to see that a new proposed area-based review is going to be an outcome of this, which is one of the things I said needed to be done. And within that area-based review, there's a few things I'd like to ask as it's currently being worked up to go to exec board in July. One is that a proper timescale and flowchart of decisions and processes is there. So like when ward members are consulted, so that we know where in the stage that is going to sit. I think that's very important that we are informed at a very early stage so that we can see what's going on because we know the area and we can perhaps help and advise that process. And also when the school are going to be consulted and governors and things like that. So we've got a very clear process. That's not quite teased out in this report. One of the things that did concern me and one of the things that also led to the failure of the consultation in my view, and I didn't mention it in here, it's not fully picked out, is that the outcomes of a potential closure, in so much as one of the concerns that I raised in full council in the white paper was it didn't appear, well, parents were coming to me saying that they couldn't find alternative provision for their children based on their SEND needs, etc. And I think when you're going through a review, part of it at the outset is to understand, is there a potential solution? You've got a problem and you need to resolve that problem, but you need to have a focus on, is there an actual solution there? And what does that entail? And is the solution more of a problem than the original problem? Because that would appear to have been what's happened here, to my view, that we've got to sort out the problem of pupil numbers in Airborough, but at the moment the solution isn't there. Now it may be that in a year or two's time that solution could have been there, so it could have been that the process could have been, we're going to look at this, now's not the right time to do it, we need a longer look at this and look at the whole area-based review, which is exactly what you're doing, which I welcome, which is also why I've asked for it to come back to scrutiny so that we can have a look at that and make sure it actually does what it says on the tin. Thank you.
Anyone like to pick up that point? Julie?
I'm happy to come in. Thank you very much, Councillor Downs. Absolutely, and I think it's reflected in the paper today that the point around timelines, clarity, flowcharts. I welcome your comments, and I think we would concur. I think that is reflected. Equally, your final point, I think by taking the probably the more strategic area-based planning approach. The very nature of that approach will lead to conversations and discussions which will be very solution-focused, you know, and involving all of those stakeholders, and also the opportunities, you know. So, you know, absolutely, we're wedded to that as part of the recommendation.
Any follow-up, Councillor Downs? Okay. Goodall.
Thanks, Chair. On page 55, it says, in terms of the ward member discussions, it says, and earlier introduction of proposals like opening Queensway as a silk could have helped. I just wanted to check on that because at the time we were told that the school had to be closed before you could make any other decisions. So is that correct? And yeah, go from that.
Effectively, what this paper is doing in that paragraph, Councillor Goodall, is reflecting what ward members have said. The advice still stands. The advice that we gave was that we had to be very careful to avoid a linked proposal, and we had to deal with the proposal in relation to the potential closure of Queensway as a standalone. But this paragraph just refers to the comments of ward members, where they've highlighted that if that had been possible, that would have been advantageous, and we will follow that through in terms of the future reports to Exec Board.
Just Councillor Goodall, do you any come back on? Are you happy with that?
I thought at the beginning there you were saying it's not possible to consider other things, but then at the end it sounded like you were saying it is possible to consider other options.
So I think what I'm saying is in the area-based planning review report, we've got to explore absolutely what are the limitations that can or can't be included in any consultation. So I'm not saying in relation to this specific one that it will come back with something that says you can link them, but we've got to acknowledge that in the paper. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for this comprehensive report as well, which I think captures quite a lot of the feedback that we were putting as ward members. This has been a really difficult time for parents, for carers, for the community. But I do think the report is quite comprehensive in terms of things that can be done differently. I mean, I think from my point of view, I would particularly highlight some of the learnings around early engagement. And I think also in terms of responses to queries from elected members. So we were very much in ongoing conversations with parents. My own experience was that when it came to individual cases, so for example, children and young people who had EHCP applications where there was individual casework, that was often responded to. But when we had other queries, it maybe took longer than perhaps was desirable in terms of our engagement with the community. So in terms of things that parents were raising with us, I do recognise pressure on officer time, but at the same time, I think it also needs to be said this is an incredibly sensitive issue, and it's very difficult for a lot of parents, and it's our job as councillors to represent our residents, and that's very much something that parents were saying to us, and very much communicating that feeling of, as people have put it to me, feeling done to, not done with, and I think there's a reflection for all of us in this process on that. One of the things that so there are two things. So one specifically to Queensway. So I think there are reflections around communication and how that can be done more effectively. So as we look forward, thinking about the position of the governors at the moment within the school, obviously governors are volunteers, they're not HR specialists, and we're not in a normal situation. So the school is in a position where it does need to recruit new staff within a very short space of time. The governors are continuing to work there, but it's not an easy situation. So my question is around what communication there is with the governors at the moment, and particularly around help being offered in relation to employment, so staff employment. So what support is being offered and what frequency of communication is there? That's a specific issue related to Queen. So I've got another more general question. Shall I give officers a chance to respond?
I'll come in first,
Julie.
and then I'm going to hand over to Phil, just to really acknowledge your initial comments there in terms of communication, and I suppose that continued dialogue, and again, I think that's set out really, really clearly as an acknowledgement in the paper this morning. I'm going to hand over to Phil, who's really been heavily involved in the ongoing discussion and support with Rebecca to the school.
First thing to say is to be absolutely clear, responsibility for staffing matters is the responsibility of the governing body of the school as a foundation school. So the council's role in there is to support and advise the governing body on those staffing matters. And it's right and proper that we acknowledge that right from the start, and that's a conversation that Rebecca and I have had directly with the Chair of Governors, where the Chair of Governors has been very keen to ensure that we recognise that there are matters for the governing body to determine. Having said that, we are providing as much support as we possibly can to the governing body in terms of how they manage the very challenging position in relation to staffing matters at the school. We have worked up proposals that we've presented back to the governing body for them for consideration, which they've taken on board and they are working through. Probably not appropriate for me to go into any depth of the detail as to what that looks like, but just to assure members that Rebecca and I have met the head teacher and the chair of the governing bodies probably about 6 or 7 times over the last month, 2 months or so. Dave Clark, the head of learning improvement, he's in weekly contact with the school. Dave is very, very involved in the very live conversations about the staffing resource that's required, and to a certain extent, Dave is facilitating those conversations to enable the governing body to have confidence in the ability for them to be able to effectively staff the school with effect from September. And as I say, those conversations aren't yet concluded, but they are progressing and they are looking promising in terms of the school being able to fulfil its responsibilities from September.
Any follow-up, Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I appreciate the answer about the governors, and I would just urge that the officers work very closely with them, because it is an incredibly challenging time, and they are doing a really important public service as volunteers, but this is a very challenging time. Councillor Downs already raised some questions about the area-based review, and I had similar questions. I'm not going to duplicate those, but just to flag them. A more general question, not only for Queensway, but I hope if not when, other schools might be in a situation like this. I mean, when we look at the national situation and we look at all the different types of schools, it is incredibly fragmented. We've got different networks of schools. You've got different trusts. All of them have their own budgetary processes and challenges, and we see that in my areas as in every area. How confident do officers feel when it comes to the powers that the council has around encouraging cooperation, particularly between different schools, and particularly around budgets, given that we have a national system which very much pushes competition and very much goes against that collaboration? How confident are we that should a situation like this arise in the future, that we have the processes to encourage that collaboration and to encourage it from a very early stage between schools? Because I think the thing that we would all agree on is that we want to avoid this situation, and if we can identify these issues earlier on and set up the processes, I would hope that would prevent other schools and other communities going through what my community and Councillor Downs' community has had to go through with this.
If I can just come in first and then hand over to Rebecca, and it's in response to your follow-up to that initial question, Councillor Edwards. Just want to reassure the board that what we are seeking to do is working with the school, not doing to the school, and that's the approach that we're taking, and that's why our approach is providing support and guidance to the school on behalf of the school's request. The school do not want, they've been very clear with us, they do not want the council coming in and sort of parachuting a survival plan for the school in relation to staffing matters. So I just want to absolutely reassure you that's the approach that we're taking, and that's the approach that the school have asked for. Probably hand over to Rebecca for the matter of detail around cooperation and working with other schools.
Thank you. I think we can put the processes in place, and in reality what we acknowledge is it's about relationships. So a lot of it is about how closely we as local authority officers work with the schools anyway, but some of our relationships across our families of schools, our area inclusion partnerships, we've got a lot of those systems in place already for those schools to work together. As we move forward and with the proposed kind of area-based planning approach, the reality is we know that there is going to be an uncertainty introduced into an area when we lay out on the table the number of places that are projected to be surplus over time. We know that we're going to have to work closely then with all of the schools in that area to understand that impact, and we know that it'll introduce an element of competition. You know, we're not we can't be blind to that. That's a reality. But I think what we always refer back to are those relationships and how closely we work. Our schools, I think for a long time, have really appreciated that we recognise the difference in the system. We recognise the academisation agenda and that fragmentation of the market. And in reality, our approach for a long time has been, these are Leeds children. Doesn't matter whether they're in an academy or a maintained school, they're our children, and we work together to support them. So I think, I guess, as far as I can have, I've got that confidence that those relationships and that collaborative approach that we have with our schools is there, and that we'll rely on that as we have the processes that underpin it. It's going to be the relationships that are going to really count.
Everyone, okay? Right, thanks very much. Oh, sorry, Julie.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just wanted, I suppose, highlight as well that this is quite a shift for us, you know, not only as a local authority, but actually for our schools in the city. And it's not just a Leeds matter. I think I've referenced here before, you know, that certainly in meetings that I'm having with directors of children's services right across the region, the fact that we're now in quite a different position, you know, in local authorities where we do have falling birth rates and the impact of that then on our schools, on their budgets, that we find ourselves in quite a different position than we have been in recent years. So I think Rebecca's point is absolutely right in terms of the relationships. And again, it does come back to communication. It does come back to conversation. The area-based planning approach in terms of pulling our partners together, you know, in specific geographic areas to have the conversations. But to a certain extent, we're finding our way through this. And again, that goes back to the importance of working with, you know, and having that solution-focused lens, whilst also, you know, not shying away from the challenges and the difficulties that we've got. But again, you know, there's nowhere else in Leeds, other than Leeds really, that in my experience, that can do that, you know, as well as we do it, because of the partnerships and the relationships that we've got. There'll always be Rob, there'll always be tension, there'll always be things to challenge us, you know, but I'm really confident, you know, that we will work our way through this in the same way that we work our way through other challenges that we have in the partnership.
Follow, Councillor Edwards? No?
I think obviously that in the lessons learned, it's really about the children and the parents and experiences of future children and parents if this process happens again. But I think it can't be lost the impact that this has had on the staff, on their mental health, on their physical health, on their financial security. And even people who have recently handed in their notice are still feeling like they have to move on feel like they've almost abandoning the school. It's just psychologically, it's really, really difficult for those very committed staff. NEU members did submit a complaint, and Councillor Hayden has responded to that, but there was a question about how the half term, this last half term of the year, would look, and I think the member of staff who was that question was directed to has actually left. So we've just got a month left, but I think staff are just wanting a bit more information, whether that comes directly from the council or from the council to governors to the staff, but they've still got that question.
Julie?
Yeah, thank you. I think this does go back to the point that Phil has already made in terms of the statutory responsibility that governors have, ultimately for their staff and the staff in the school. Having said that, I'm very, very conscious. We've spoken here, we've spoken in Exec Board about the impact, on children, on families, on the staff, as you're highlighting. And that's why we are working with, that's why the meetings and the approach that Phil's just set out in terms of 6-7 meetings already between Phil, Rebecca, the governors, the head, Dave Clark in terms of our Head of Service for Learning Improvement being in weekly contact, because we absolutely recognise that, and that's where we are committed to working with.
Follow up, Kate? Yeah. Helen, sorry.
So just in answer to that question that staff have asked, so do they need to go to the governors on that rather than wait for a response from a member of the council?
Yeah, I think to be really clear, I think if staff do have questions or concerns about their employment, with the school, then they have to have those conversations with their, their employer and with the governors. Absolutely.
If I could just add to that, it's a foundation trust school as well. There is a foundation and a family of schools. So it's, in this kind of complex system that we're working on, they're not directly maintained school. So there's the foundation trust, and I know that head of the trust is working really hard with the chair of governors and on the staffing issues with support from ourselves, but we haven't actually got the legal capacity to actually answer some of those questions. Thank you.
A follow-up, Helen? Okay. All right. Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Chair. I think I have five quick questions. First one, this is the first opportunity we've had since the Exec Board last week on the broader points. Can I just clarify, Councillor Hayden, at Exec Board you said that the process of consultation for the closure of Queensway had been paused. Can you just clarify what you meant by that?
We rescinded the statutory notice we rescinded the notice of the statutory consultation.
So was it, just to clarify, that it was an error, was it? You meant to say that it hasn't paused, it's been rescinded and gone back to square one. You were wrong last week.
The process has been paused in order to do an area-based approach, as will be set out in July Exec Board.
Could we just get a quick legal clarification on the process? The process is no longer a process, is it? It's been scrapped altogether.
Well, the decision that went to Exec Board has been rescinded. That process, there's various options associated with that process, which the council will need to consider with legal advice outside of this forum.
Okay, thank you. In the report, there's discussion in terms of the ward members' input. And I was listening carefully because there's a couple of ward members here. I just want clarity really on the process, because of involvement in that. It says that it notes in the report there's a need for much earlier and deeper member engagement in these decisions going forward. And obviously it's quite a unique scenario, this, because one of the ward members was a deputy exec board member, so there would be different information provided to ward members. I just wonder, is there a process within this that means either all ward members get the same information at the same time, or if a ward member also has an executive duty, do they have to remove themselves from a process so that they don't have more information than others, if you get my following.
Becky,
Sorry, is that question to me? Or is that to the executive? I think Phil's going to come in.
So Councillor Stevenson, we can be very, very clear for the board. Our engagement with the ward members is as ward members. That's the nature of the engagement that we have. I think we would acknowledge, wouldn't we, that members of the council occupy various roles and have various areas of responsibility that span various issues, but when we are engaging with ward members, we are engaging with them as ward members and as representatives of their local community. I think we're very clear on that. And from my understanding and my knowledge of what has happened, the engagement with ward members has been on a collective basis and has straddled two wards, given the geography of Queensway School.
It's probably just a learning point. It doesn't need a response, but it's probably something to pick up. In that, I know, for example, if a Minister of State in the housing department cannot take a judgment on a planning application in their local area because there's clearly a conflict, and I think it's probably something to pick up on in terms of the differential role between a ward member and an exec board member or deputy member is taking a decision or influence a decision in their ward. So just to flag that missing in the report.
Chair, if I could come in on that, as a deputy exec member, no decision was made around Queensway School. We went out to consultation. As a deputy exec member, they are not the decision maker. So I am the decision maker on certain, so therefore I would, if there was a conflict of interest, remove myself from certain situations. But as a deputy, it's not the decision maker.
I think it's about influencing the process, but we've made the point. So can I just clarify as well on the point about the workshops that were attended by officers around the broader school place planning, which we've mentioned is going to be picked up again. It mentions that discussions did need to take place with all schools. However, it was noted that opportunity was missed to continue engaging. It was flagged with me that the initial meeting that occurred with all schools and the then executive member was actually a special meeting of the community committee in the area. It was requested by the then children's champion on the committee. When you look at the minutes of that meeting, the committee itself does move that there should be a follow-up meeting arranged, and it seems that never happened. And the only thing I'd noticed in this report is a lot of quite honest feedback and comments, which I think is welcome, in terms of, I would say failings, but errors perhaps on the way of council officers or various people. But it just misses, I think, the role of the community committee that was heavily involved. And I think elected members on the community committee, it's the then Councillor Alderson that was pushing for that, pushed for the community committee to have a role in it broadly, and then it seems that fell off the radar after change of elected members. So I think it's worth picking up the role of a community committee more widely when we're talking about school place planning, and the role of the children's champion on community committee as well.
Chair, is it helpful to respond to that? I think that's a fair challenge from Councillor Stevenson, and one that we will try to pick up. I think in terms of how we take things along, probably just a little bit of context about the lessons learned exercise, because the lessons learned exercise we've attempted to do in a relatively short time period, because obviously we wanted to get it back to you because you'd requested it, and we also wanted it to feed into the future report to Executive Board. So we have taken a very focused approach in terms of the lessons learned. But Councillor Stevenson's general point about the community committee is a point well made, and one that we'll take forward.
In the report, there's some observation in terms of the timing at which legal advice came into this process throughout. So I just wonder, in terms of part of the lessons learned, are we looking at the staffing structure across senior leadership to ensure that we have perhaps like somebody dedicated at a senior level to permanently, so what I'm saying, are we increasing the legal capacity, I guess, or do you need more as a directorate, and is there a plan for that?
I don't think that that was highlighted as a specific area of learning, in particular in terms of needing more capacity or needing a different level of seniority at all. I think really what this was about was around, I suppose, having that cross-corporate, cross-directorate approach. I think it was really, it goes back to the timeliness, it goes back to setting out the timescales and ensuring that communication is as timely and as effective as it can be. There's no suggestion that there was issues of capacity or issues in terms of not having the required level of expertise or seniority in the room.
Okay. And my final question, Chair, is around, it builds on Helen's point around staffing in September. It hasn't escaped me that there's something on the horizon here, that in September we know that the majority of staff have secured new jobs, and you can't blame them for that, the situation they've been put into, and they haven't done it lightly. But we could end up in a situation in September where the governors cannot safely reopen the school if it isn't staffed. And the outcome of that, by law, will be the governors have to make a decision to keep the school closed, and that is not a decision that they wanted to make. It's one that's been caused by this council's actions. It would probably be an easy get-out to be able to say this council didn't shut it, the governors did. That would be a wrong assumption to make. To avoid that situation, whilst I note Phil's comments about the school not wanting the council to parachute a solution, which you can understand given where we are, but it's going to be very costly for the school to have agency staff in to keep the school open in September. So whilst the council won't be parachuting a solution, are they in dialogue and in terms of budgets to provide additional funding for them to have agency staff, which would be more expensive than was?
I'll come in first and then I'm going to hand over to Phil. I think it's just really important to say that the reason that we went into the initial process in respect of Queensway was because there was significant evidence about the ongoing viability, financial viability of the school. And the model in terms that the school was operating, and that the school itself was looking at significant increased financial deficit. And we as a local authority have got a responsibility to respond to that. Obviously, and nobody would disagree here, that equally we have a responsibility to children and families, across the city, and we have to balance that. But equally we can't shy away from our statutory responsibility in terms of, supporting schools where there are deficits, etc. So, there's been learning, absolutely, but I think it's really important to highlight that there were concerns about the school, and that's why we entered into the process. I'm going to hand over to Phil just to answer the second part of the points that you've made.
And don't want to repeat the comments that I've made previously, but the school are very clear that they need an appropriate staffing structure in place for September. The school are working towards that, and we are supporting them in that endeavour. At the time of speaking, I'm not aware that there has been a request to the local authority to do anything more than we are currently doing in terms of that support. Should a request come in, we would obviously seek to explore that request, but currently my understanding is that the focus is on securing a sufficiently robust enough resource to manage that school safely and appropriately, and reflecting the number of children who they expect to be on roll in September.
Any follow-up, Ryan? No? Councillor Downs.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of other little thoughts. One is after the first consultation, where the decision was reversed to close the school, there was no real correspondence with ward members as to or even the school, as far as I'm aware, as to what criteria was required to keep the school going and to avoid a second consultation. So when the second consultation came around, I was as equally surprised as I was with the first. And my concern now is that we've had this time we've had a decision rescinded from the Executive Board. I have had one meeting with officers, but just the one, and I know that there have been many with the school, and I think as a ward member I would like a greater involvement, because between the first and second consultations I was effectively given to understand everything was fine, everything was rosy in the garden, as seen by the fact that they then had a full pan and they had a good Ofsted. My concern is that ward members potentially being excluded again, and whether there is a future consultation, an area-based review. I really want to know in advance so that I am well informed, so that I can help form what goes forward amongst the school, governors and parents and the community, who are, to be honest, a bit disappointed with what's happened with 2 consecutive consultations, both of which were initially led to a closure and then subsequently that's been changed so that the school remains open. The question is, how long will the school remain open? And as we've seen, the majority of staff have left because they don't have faith in their job security, and you can understand that. I want to make sure that there is a job security for future staff and for future pupils, or if not, where are we going with this? And please, can ward members continue to be involved at every corner, please?
If I just come in there first, there weren't 2 consecutive consultations. One happened 2.5 years before the second one. In going forward with an area-based approach that will involve the ward members, all the ward members in that area, not just the one ward. So we will look to set out, there's a reticence, I think, just across the country, that if you actually look at the problem, then the insecurity sets in straight away and very quickly. I think from a personal point of view, I think I don't want that security. I know what it's like to work in a school. I worked in schools for 16 years, so you don't want all you want is that security. So people quite rightly and naturally make assumptions when they see some of the issues. So, but we are going to do that. It will be set out. There will be, as Rebecca has said, that will bring insecurity when people fully realise the scale of the problem, and ward members will be involved, and it will be an open process, and it will require those relationships to get what's best, not just for the children and families in that area, but across the city. Because if schools are in deficit, they are, I have to be blunt about this, taking money from a pot that other schools that comes from other schools in the city. We get one pot of money for the city that then is distributed to schools on a pupil numbers basis, and then we have the high needs block. So if one school is taking more money because its numbers are lower, then it is taking money. It's either we go into deficit as a city, or it is taking money from other schools. So we have to see it across communities, yes, across an area, yes, but we have to keep in mind that this is a Leeds issue, and that we have one pot of money to educate the children in this city.
Councillor Dowd, are you happy with that?
Not entirely.
Okay.
The focus of my question was, can we be involved now, even before any area-based review is conducted? Basically, a continuous update from officers.
And I've said yes.
I didn't pick up on the clarity of that.
And you will be involved in, all ward members in the area will be involved in the area review.
Thanks, Kathleen. I was actually going to mention that because that was the first thing you said, I think, when you were addressing the question.
I welcome this report. It's obviously been really helpful to see the lessons learned, outcomes and the recommendations. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the practical implementation of the recommendations in terms of ensuring that situation like this doesn't arise again, which has obviously been extremely stressful for everybody concerned, not to mention obviously costly as well. Just a couple of things that I picked up on. So I noted the recommendation for cross-director officers to receive refresher training. So I wanted to just ask about that in terms of how and when that's likely to be delivered, and also in relation to ensuring that legal services are embedded in project teams from the outset, and in relation to area-based reviews and the ABR model, it says at point G on page 57 that for complex consultations it's recommended that a project manager be assigned, and for all relevant departments to be involved to support schools effectively. So again, it's just queries around who's going to ensure that legal services are embedded at the earliest stage, who's going to decide that something's complex. You don't always know at the outset that it's going to be complex. That sometimes becomes apparent further down the line. So it's just wanting some reassurance around how you're actually going to practically implement some of these recommendations. Thanks, Julie.
It's okay, I'm happy to come in first of all. I suppose just to say that in taking the area-based planning approach, I think we recognise, and I think our starting point is that it is going to be complex. You know, because again, it's a relatively new approach for us all. You know, there are implications, as we've said, you know, for individual schools, for staff, for children, for families. So it is really, really complex. So we're starting off on that premise, and I think the learning has highlighted that in terms of, you know, it requires a rigorous methodology and a cross-directorate approach, as well as being really clear about the communication, the principles, you know, in action of working with. But I'm going to hand over to Phil, who'll just answer some of your specific questions.
So I think it's helpful just to remind the Scrutiny Board that the area-based planning review will be coming to Executive Board, and as acknowledged at the start, may well come back to the Scrutiny Board, and that will supply a lot of detail in terms of what we're doing. Provide a reassurance to the Scrutiny Board that the principles in relation to this are me and Rebecca. We're the principles in relation to this report. We're the principles in relation to the area-based planning report. So there is a continuity of senior officer stewardship through this, and so therefore we will make sure that what comes from this will flow in to those processes. We've already alluded to the fact that actually the issue about legal services isn't one of capacity. It's about connectedness, I think. And I think we need to make sure that that connectedness exists and is embedded in relation to any proposals that move forward. That also applies to colleagues from finance and HR. So effectively what we're seeking to do is put that more formalised project around this to make sure that all the people who need to be in there will be in there. The issue about project support is recognising the fact that actually this is and I must stress this, you know, it's a very, very small team. A very small 3 people, a small team of 3 people who are dealing with some of the most contentious issues in relation to school planning matters that this city has ever dealt with. And what we're acknowledging is that some additional capacity that allows them to do their areas of specialism, whilst provides some additional capacity around comms and engagement and project management and doing all the sorts of Gantt charts that are needed for something like this. That will be provided as part of the Directorate Transformation team to strengthen the entire approach around this. So that's the plan, and that we will see it through because it's us who've done this and it's us that will do the next bit.
Thank you. And in terms of the training, you've talked before about sort of communication and connectiveness between cross departments. So would you be envisaging, or is it too early to say that the training that you're proposing to deliver would be delivered in a cross-directorate way? Because I'm just thinking that might be beneficial.
Definitely. I've got a wry smile because, you know, the writing of reports for members is an art that you gain over many, many years. But I think what we've acknowledged realistically is that we need to provide some greater advice to officers, particularly some relatively junior officers who are dealing with these matters, about how you make sure that enough detail is provided in those reports, and then that is going to be done again around that whole team approach. So we will lean heavily into colleagues in democratic services and legal services in relation to that.
Happy with that, Kate? All right, thanks. Just incidentally, at the end of this particular item, we will be suggesting an additional recommendation which will cover the area-based review issues that Councillor Edwards was going to bring up before Councillor Downs actually mentioned it, and Kate as well. So hopefully it won't address, I think, all of your concerns, but what it will do is reflect what we're going to do as a scrutiny board on that, okay, which we will get to in a moment. Any other sort of comments, questions? Councillor Flint.
Just a quick question, just bringing it back to the children and going forward, if we're going through this process again, just wondered if there's any learning around communication with children, like through uncertainty, because obviously the main people who will be communicating with the children are the staff and the parents, but and carers, but that might really vary. And we're talking about kids, I guess, age 4 to 11, but you know, we know kids pick up on stress and uncertainty, and there'll be a lot of, you know, variety of understanding. So I just wondered if there's any learning or advice that we've got going forward about how we communicate with children.
I'm happy to come into that. Thank you. I think in a way that the area-based planning approach gives us an opportunity to talk about that in the round, you know, and I think it does give us an opportunity as well to share best practice. And you know, there's a whole many tools, you know, and very many approaches that we can use to talk to children about all sorts of matters which might impact on them and might be distressing and create uncertainty, etc. So I do think, again, that the area-based planning approach gives us an opportunity to talk about that as a partnership, you know, and also to support each other through that, you know, which I think is key. But it's a helpful point, and it's something that we can perhaps think to highlight more when we bring back the next report. Thank you.
Okay, Emma? Yeah. Happy? Okay, thanks. Any more sort of comments or questions from the board? Okay, thanks. Helen?
Just on the back of what Emma said, I'm just thinking, when there's any uncertainty or anything happening in schools that are going to impact children, obviously the staff are there to try and support the children. But in this kind of situation, I'm just thinking for the area-based review, it needs to be mindful that the staff are in a really stressful situation as well, and aren't necessarily all at any point able to support the children as effectively as they would be if they weren't already in a stressful situation themselves.
I would hope that taking an area-based approach, so that hopefully all schools being in it together and recognising the shared problems, which is maybe, you know, not being encouraged in the past because of competition. And, you know, I've had through my door, within the same cluster and within the schools within the same cluster and within the same multi-academy trust, actually advertising for places in 2 different schools within, you know, so under that backdrop that we've seen in the recent past, we need now to foster a kind of area approach that all schools are facing this situation of falling birth rates in the primary sector, and we need to work together in order to get the best outcomes for the children and the staff. And yeah, you know, as a member of staff and a parent, you put your own oxygen mask on first, don't you? Because you can't do anything if you're falling over. So to support the children who are the most important. So we need to work together as a community to make sure that we've got the right kind of school places and of varying different needs, and see it as an opportunity to actually get things right in the area. Demographics change, families move, into houses, people grow older. My parents are living in a 5-bedroomed house in Crossgates, by themselves. So in what should be a family house. So, and demographics change. So those families are living somewhere else. So demographics change, and we have to have a look at that whole picture and see what's best going forward. And with that, we are talking to experts in the field of population and demographics and getting as much advice as we can, and that will be fed, and that will continue in the area-based approach.
Any follow, Helen? Okay. Right. Any further questions, comments, or whatever? Right. Thanks very much. I just had the point I raised right at the very start, basically, without going into the legal advice here today. I just wanted an assurance, perhaps from Rebecca, who wrote the paper, and perhaps Nikki as well, that the advice that we've been given has been followed to the letter, as it were, and is incorporated in every sense in the lessons learned paper that we've got here today. Rebecca, you first.
Yeah, I mean, every advice that we've received has been, as Phil says, I think before papers arrive here, there are multiple versions and drafts and input and advice that we receive from colleagues. So, yes, everything that we've received has been shared here.
Thanks. And are legal happy too?
Well, to avoid conflict, I've not been part of that process. It's entirely appropriate that I advise you and give you legal advice at this board. But what I can say is that my fellow head of legal services has been part of that process as well. So it has been assured by legal.
Right, thanks very much indeed. If we could just then move on to the recommendation. And there is an additional recommendation to the one in the papers on page 53. The first one is to note and comment on the findings of the lesson learned exercise detailed in this report. And as an addition, in view of the number of comments we've had about the area-based review today, we're suggesting that we add a recommendation that the Scrutiny Board to be kept involved in implementation of lessons learned and considers the area-based review report going into the Executive Board in July at the earliest opportunity, which would be in July ourselves, I think. So can I have a proposal for those two recommendations? Councillor Downs and a seconder. Councillor Edwards. All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Carried unanimously. Thanks very much indeed. I'm conscious that some members have been here since 9:15 this morning, and some of us earlier than that again. Perhaps this is a time just to have an actual break. If you could sort of reconvene in about 10 minutes, please refill your coffees, biscuits, and whatever else you need to do. has joined us. Councillor Hayden, do you want to start, or Julie or Chris? Please.
Yes, I'll kick off. So this is our annual performance report. Provides an overview of progress across the service in line with the priorities set out in the Children and Young People's Plan. It provides detail across a wide range of indicators from early years to attendance to safeguarding, care leavers and workforce stability. It highlights areas where outcomes are improving, such as early development and support into positive destinations for care experienced young people, whilst also noting where challenges remain, particularly around persistent absence. I'd like to highlight the reduction since this time last year in children looked after numbers, which remained relatively stable. But in terms of all data, there is a lag, and we won't have the full report until autumn in terms of 2025. This report is a part of our ongoing commitment to scrutiny and continuous improvement, enabling us to monitor performance, consider areas of focus and support informed decision making across the partnership. I just want to say huge thanks to the team. They're a small team, and they presented the different kind of partnership meetings that we've had in order to discuss certain issues like the numbers coming into and are currently in FE and the service they give in terms of the data and making sure that we're really making decisions in a partnership way, but on evidence and data is invaluable, and I really appreciate it, and just want to say a huge thanks for their continued work on this.
Thanks. Julie?
Thank you. I suppose just to add really that, at its heart, this is about us delivering our Children and Young People's Plan, and the obsessions that are set out in that plan. Equally, it is about child-friendly Leeds. At the end of the day, the vision that we have in Leeds is for Leeds to be the best city for a child to live and grow up in. We have a question, and it's set out in the Children and Young People's Plan, and it should guide, and direct everything that we do, which is, what is it like to be a child or a young person living and growing up in Leeds in 2025, and how do we make it better? So ultimately it's about impact. Everything that we do, how are we measuring the difference that is making for, the lives of children, essentially. Key to that, is a focus on what we call in the Directorate doing the simple things well. So this is, our basic statutory responsibility that we have for children, and this is where the performance comes in, both in terms of the Children and Young People's Plan and its obsessions, but our day-to-day practice and our fulfilment of our statutory responsibilities, and then in turn, how that supports children to make good progress. So it's about being ambitious. We are a big, large core city, as I've already set out this morning, with a lot of complexity, a lot of deprivation and challenge. But we're a rich, diverse city, with some of the most wonderful children and families that I've ever met. And so it's about retaining our ambition for those children. I'm going to hand over to Chris, and Chris is going to talk us through, the areas where we're doing well, but also the areas where we want to do better, and are committed to doing better. And this is the bit about stretching ourselves, having that continuous improvement lens and focus, because we want to get the best for children in Leeds.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about a few of the figures that are quoted at section 15 of the report, which I think is page 70 of the pack, and I'll also refer to the appendices, but I won't go into too much detail in the appendices, but if people have specific questions about that information, I'm happy to go into that. So just really picking up to start with on what Councillor Hayden said about the children looked after numbers. At the end of March, we had 1,495 young people who were looked after in Leeds. It's a very similar figure today, actually. That's been a reduction of about 6% over the last 12 months. That figure has steadily and appropriately reduced. And at the moment, that figure is, when we express that as a rate of 10,000 compared to other authorities, we are below the core cities average. We're above the England average, which we have been for a while, but that gap is very slightly closed. We'll have more data on the up-to-date national picture at the end of into the autumn. But that is an area of relative strength at the moment, with that number slowly reducing. We also refer to in the report about young people who are not in education, employment, training, acronym of NEET, or those who have a not known status. And you'll see in the bullet point that we've provided, our NEET young people at the end of March was just under 1,100, which is 150 higher than the figure at the same time last year. However, we've seen ongoing reduction in our not known figures as we continue to work closely with colleges and FE providers to make sure we have the most accurate information in a timely manner, so we're able to place even more confidence in the figures that we have there. You'll see in Appendix 4, where we have the updates on the obsession, there's some context as to what we are trying to do in Leeds to further reduce that number, and there's some narrative in that section to which I'd refer you. I did just want to briefly pick up on the reoffending figure that we have in there. So the latest figure that we have quoted is 44.9%. So that is of young people who have offended, 44.9% have gone on to reoffend within a time-limited window. That the figure there had increased by 4 percentage points compared to the previous period. Just to note, though, that the figures that we quote there are national figures, so we can provide some context. They run at a significant time lag, so they're 22-23 figures, because that's the latest we have nationally. We do obviously track that information locally in year, and we have local figures that show that we have seen a decrease in reoffending rates, specifically over the last 18 months. So we are seeing a more positive picture there. However, in the national statistics, that will take some time to come through, but really just to provide some reassurance that figure has started to reduce, and there's been various initiatives through things like the turnaround programme that's provided funding that has helped us to intervene with young people who are at risk before they commit an offence in the first place. So hopefully that will continue to show positive performance there. This is a report that we bring twice a year. So we've included for reference the attainment data for the last academic year. When we come back in January, we will have the figures for the exams that have just been sat recently. So that's in there. So there's no update to provide on attainment at the moment. We do have some attendance in there. Again, we've provided full year data just to provide that national context, but we have also provided some figures to show what's happening in Leeds this year, and I'll just pick up on those. And they are at the top of page 71, I believe, 72 in the pack. So we do collect in-year data from schools, and the majority of Leeds schools now submit data to the Department for Education on a daily basis, to which we have access, and that helps both the schools and the local authority understand the picture in Leeds. So across the whole of schools, 93.3% attendance was the figure in March. In primary, that was just under 95%. And in secondary school, that was 91.6%. So they do show an improvement on the 23-24 figures, which is obviously positive news. But there are challenges that do remain, particularly around the number of young people who are persistently absent and those who are severely absent as well. I think the final area I'd just like to highlight is in Appendix 5, which is around education, health and care plans, and I know that's been an area of focus in the past. I won't quote the figures that are in the report because they're there to see, but what I think is useful to say is just to give some context to that. And I looked at some information up to the end from January to May of this year, and we've seen a huge increase in both the number of assessments being completed, the number of educational health and care plans being in place, and the number of requests coming in. I think we've seen almost 120% increase in the number of assessments being completed. 118% in terms of education, health and care plans. So that's really just to say the volume of work coming in and assessments being completed is higher than ever. So we are seeing real significant increase there. However, we need to acknowledge the challenge that still is the requests that are coming in the first place. And I think probably I'll stop there for now and invite questions and hopefully be able to answer questions members may have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Chris. Any comments or doings?
Thank you, Chair. On exclusions, which is interesting to me, is do we know that certain schools exclude more than others, and do we have that data? Because I think that would be interesting. Also, where we have an attendance issue, do we have the number of kids that were travelling across the city, is that higher than kids that go to local school? The implication to me is it probably is, but I have no data to prove that. So what I would really like to see is which schools have a higher rate of exclusions, and at the time of year, is it before exams? And the next point I would make is that where kids are excluded, how quick are we able to get them back into education? Because the longer the delays, the less chance, from my view, is that they will go to a different school.
Thanks, Councillor. In terms of the exclusions at school level, yes, we have that data. So part of the live data that we receive from schools now on a daily basis about attendance also includes their suspensions information. Where any child is suspended for more than 5 days, the school has a responsibility to provide a 6-day offer. So from the 6th day, they have to be offered an education, even if it's not back in their own school. So, for example, if a pupil's suspended for 10 days, then from the 6th day, that school has to make arrangements for them to receive education throughout that suspension period. We do monitor those patterns of where suspensions are happening. Permanent exclusions, we remain significantly lower than other cities. The suspensions, we do monitor patterns. We know that schools have their right to set their behaviour policies, and that influences how often some schools suspend compared to others. But our area inclusion partnerships work really closely with those schools to offer additional support to children where they're starting to increase the number of suspensions. So where we can see that a young person is receiving more suspensions and that it's not having an impact on behaviour, which is ultimately the point of a suspension, that the area inclusion partnership teams offer support to those schools to say that suspension's not having the impact that you're looking for, what else needs to happen, what other support needs to be brought in, how else can we work with the young person to improve the behaviour. I think in terms of attendance and travelling across the city, again, we're working really closely with the schools. So as part of the new attendance regulations that came into place last August, we have regular targeting support meetings. So that's with individual schools and also with clusters and groups of schools to look at sharing good practice and identifying whether there are any patterns and any systemic barriers that we can overcome. So where there are a lot of children travelling to get to a school and that's having an impact on attendance, that would be one of the things that would come up in those conversations. And again, we're using the family hubs as they're developing and their attendance support, our school attendance improvement advisors in the local authority, and those school experts, because we've got staff in schools that are really, really focused on seeking to improve attendance by removing those barriers for children where they exist, where they possibly can. Attendance and the number of children that are severely and persistently absent is a really big priority for us, and we're doing what we can. We recognise that it's very complex. It's not often about children just saying, I can't go to school today. There's a lot behind a lot of children who are regularly not attending school.
Just to follow on from Rebecca's final point there, I think in order to we do what we can, but it also has to be acknowledged on a national level that the curriculum is not fit for purpose for about a third of our children, and then and they literally are voting with their feet. Sometimes I would suggest, again, like you, Councillor Jones, I don't have the evidence, the circumstantial evidence that and when you talk to young people and why, especially when they get to GCSE and they have to do GCSEs that I would have loved because I was a geek, but like that are not, not suitable for everyone and are not suitable for us in our 21st century either in terms of so there's a lot around poverty has a huge impact on pupils attending. So I welcome the uplift in free school meals and that many more families will have access to free school meals. But when you mentioned travel, the cost of travel to for children if they don't live near a school. And even if they do, it's having the right uniform, all those different things really comes. So I chair the Poverty Impact Board, which obviously is not, but it's all those incidental things that we're doing as a council, looking at the holistic picture for children, not just school, but all those that goes into it. That's an incredible, it should be my most depressing meeting. It's a truly uplifting because the commitment and energy and just the work that gets done, from uniform exchanges to, sorting out prom, it's all those different things in terms of dealing with food and food pantries and things like that. So, and it's attended by our financial inclusion team, but also by third sector like Zarek and tackling bed poverty. So, I've gone on a bit too long, but I think attendance is such a huge, and then it's been compounded by the pandemic, and certain attitudes changing with some families during the pandemic. So we've got a lot of work to do, but there's an awful lot of work going on, and we really recognise it as a huge priority.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you. My concern, and this is a connection that I think I may be wrong, and I have to say I have no data to prove this, is where we have children who are travelling across the city and they are late for school repeatedly. The normal implication is it can be due, most times it's going to be out of the bus if I'm being absolutely honest, but they will then get a detention. Is that one of the reasons that later on leads to exclusion because the kids are simply saying, if I go to school today I'm going to be late, I'm going to be in detention? Is there a link there that I think we may want to have a look at? Is that what's going on? And I thank Helen for her comments particularly because that was really helpful to us to be absolutely. And I appreciate the work that you're doing, by the way.
It's not a link that we've identified, but I'm happy to have another look at it and come back to you.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. On page 74, Appendix 1, children looked after. How the reduction in numbers impact director budget, please?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? Sorry, apologies. Thank you. Happy to come back on that. I think where I would start would be our obsession in the Children and Young People's Plan is around safely reducing the need for children to become looked after. So as a directorate, we exist to provide effective help and protection, and where children need help and protection and where children need to become looked after, we've got a statutory responsibility to do that and a whole statutory process to go through. So that it's really, really important to say we are not about just reducing the numbers of children in care. We're about providing effective help and protection. I think the fact that we have continued to have a sustained decrease in the numbers of children looked after is testimony to our partnership work across the city. You know, and again, it goes back to children's services can't do this on our own. In Leeds, you know, for many, many years, going back certainly to 2009, 2010, when we began our significant improvement journey, we had that absolute focus and belief, professional belief, but moral belief, and our values in the city is that we believe that children do well, do best when they're able to live with their families and with kin. So our whole focus, our whole family-led approach, our commitment and continued investment into family group conferencing, into our kinship teams, into our reunification teams, are all aimed at enabling and ensuring that children can live safely with family or with kin. Absolutely, your question, how does that impact on the budget? It has a significant impact on the budget, as you can imagine, because when any child is brought into care, there is a significant cost to that. We know that we've got a broken children's social care market. We've talked about that here on many occasions. The cost of external residential placement in particular, the average cost I think being about £350,000 a week now. That's average. For some children, the weekly cost of being in external residential placement, it was way, way, way above that. So statutory intervention, bringing a child into care is very, is costly. We know that we've got, as I've mentioned, our growth in adolescence in the city. And if you look at our, not just Leeds, all local authorities, predominantly the numbers of children in external residential will be adolescents, so the significant cost. But as importantly, what we also know, and it's a sad reality, that when we bring a child into care, the outcomes for that child are likely to be poor. Because we know the impact of, or the importance of a child having identity, a child having a sense of belonging, a child being able to, understand their family and their culture, what that means for a child in terms of their self-esteem, in terms of their confidence, in terms of their ability to transition into adulthood, their mental health, so we know that when we break, when we have to bring a child into care, that is the negative impact of that. What I would also say, though, in Leeds, and this is why, we're really, really proud to be in Leeds and to have the partnership that we've got, is even in the event where we do have to bring a child into care, our focus is immediately on how do we return that child to family. How do we find, kin who will be able to, where we'll be able to reunify that child. Where that's not possible, then it's how can we find a family placement for that child. So a foster care placement, our small group living homes, which create a family environment for a child, which is what we want. So I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
If I could just come in, sorry, Councillor Khan, if I could just come in on that, and just to add to that, when Julie mentioned the amount of teenagers, and we've got a big cohort of teenagers at the moment, and they are the biggest group coming into care. Whilst it has a positive effect on the budget, and you don't want, the less numbers, the complexity of those coming into care is higher than it has been in the past because they're teenagers and because of trauma. So the cost of their placement will be higher on average than, say, if they're in previous years. So although we've got less, the cost, as Julie mentioned, because of the complexity of teenagers and what they've been through, which has led them to come into care, is often higher.
Any follow-up, Councillor Khan? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Julie, for what you were saying about the about children coming into care, and I think keeping that in mind, keeping in mind the impact on the children and young people is really important, and not simply looking at this from a numbers point of view. And also, Councillor Hayden, when it comes to the caveat about the complexity of those young people coming into care, I think is important. I would find it helpful to understand. So when we look at the numbers of looked after children falling, and also the numbers of children subject to child protection falling, both of those are very welcome statistics. It'd be helpful to understand more about what accounts for that from a directorate perspective, and what can be done to maintain that progress, because I think it is progress to see numbers falling. But what are the reasons behind that for both of those categories? And then the other question that I would like to ask is or more of a request, maybe looking at persistent absence. So this is referred to on page 71 of the report. So it's noted that persistent absence has decreased, but it's still high. I think it'd be quite helpful. Well, I would certainly find it helpful as a member of this board. So I won't speak for other people, but I would certainly find it helpful in terms of that persistent absence if we could understand more about some of the backgrounds behind that. So understanding things like people's socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicity, age, even geographical or ward areas would be quite helpful. So where there is persistent absence, getting a clearer picture of where this is and who it's affecting. We can all speculate about what that might be, but it would be quite helpful to see a fuller picture of that. I note that we've got some quite helpful breakdown in terms of children looked after. I saw that later on in the report, and that's helpful, but I think it would be helpful in terms of that piece of work around persistent absence to understand more about the background behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think all the conversation today, so earlier when we spoke about absent and suspension and children's access to education and the factors that impact on children attendance at school are also factors that feature. I'll start off with our looked after cohort, and I know we've got some of the statistics here, but I have a duty to look at all looked after children that are coming into our care as a deputy director, and we, my leadership team, we look at those children. We look at any factors, any learning from children coming into care. As Councillor Hayden said, we see a high number of children who are secondary school age. We see some characteristics in those children, commonality for those children. So that might be childhood trauma, very early childhood trauma that impacts on them, lack of access to services in the very early stages and then becoming known to services later on in that journey. If you are from an area of deprivation, you are more likely to come into care, and we see that across our city. And I suppose that's been the driving factor in how we align our services, so our family hubs being based in our most deprived areas to look at how we can engage parents very early and families in that space. Because what we know is we spend a significant amount on children looked after in external residentials, not always where the best for children, and we know long-term outcomes as well. We want to make sure that as early as possible we are engaging families from all our communities to access that support. We've been able to maintain the numbers, and we would like to reduce those numbers because it's right for children to be supported in families by a focus on that preventative work. You know, we've been on a journey from 2010. I've spent all bar one of my years as a social worker in Leeds, and what we learn along the way, what we've learned is, this is about 90% of the families we work with. More than 90% need support at the right time, and that's an opportunity to get that right from our front door, from our early discussions. And there's 10% of children that might experience significant abuse or neglect where that would warrant immediate action, but the system is set up almost nationally for that 10%. In Leeds, You know, we have operated a no thresholds, a conversation-based discussion between practitioners at the front door with referrals. We have relationships with our schools. We recognise education as a protective factor, and what we know is where children aren't engaged in school, they're more at risk of exploitation, they're more risk of coming into care, they're more risk of being known to youth justice services. So that drives the focus of our work, and what we've been able to do is keep those numbers low because of that work, and we are building on that further. There's lots of national learning with the Pathfinders as well, and more opportunities around kinship care, around how we strengthen children where they cannot remain with parents, with extended family. And, you know, we are involved in those discussions, and they'll be learning around those. We also are in touch with Pathfinders around family help and looking at multi-agency child protection arrangements. We've got a really strong partnership through the Leeds Children Safeguarding Partnership, and we want to build on those on our front door to implement the reforms. So for us, we have that foundation from 2010 where we recognise that you know, it's been part of our obsessions that hasn't changed in response to recent challenges. That's always been the case of our 3 obsessions, is wherever safely possible we want to keep children at home with families because that's right to do so. We have a lot of learning in that space still, and we should always be open to learning and developing and adapting our services to meet current needs and challenges for children and families to prevent family breakdown. So that's where you know, our social care and our learning colleagues, that's where together we are having the discussion, and with wider partners. We've already got the relationships, the platform through Child Friendly Leeds. For the child protection numbers, we have been able to, on our journey from 2010, we've been able to stabilise those numbers and keep them low, and that's a real positive reflection of actually the work that happens before children go to child protection. We have lots of checks and balances in that space to make sure that we don't miss children that need to be subject to child protection, including a weekly referral review meeting that looks at referrals for abuse and neglect at the front door, and that's a partnership meeting, so that we have that lens and oversight to make sure that those aren't missed. But what it reflects is that we have a proportionate, appropriate response to the needs of children and families, and that's where we've been able to keep those numbers at that level.
Any follow-up, Councillor Edwards?
I'm happy to come in on the attendance point. If that
could I? We've got another 7 speakers on this subject alone, so if we could ask people who are asking the question to be as succinct as you can, and officers to be as brief and as full as you can.
Thank you. We brought an attendance paper to Children's Scrutiny last autumn about school attendance. I'm happy for us to consider bringing a more detailed report in the future around, just to update on those persistent absence data and the demographics, if that's requested.
Tiny one.
Very quickly, 1 sentence. I think that would be really helpful.
Thanks very much indeed. Tony, we've reached you at last.
A few years ago, we did an inquiry on exclusion. We never really concluded that inquiry because of COVID. But what was coming out clearly was that the biggest problem was not exclusion, but internal exclusion, where kids were being left into a room and do what they like. After that, are we any information on that situation now?
Rebecca? Yeah.
It's not something that we routinely collect information on the use of internal isolation. I know it has been a subject of national interest and consideration, but I am happy to look into that a little bit more and understand more about it.
Any follow-up, Tony?
I think that'd be very useful.
Noted, Tony. Thanks very much. Okay. Helen.
Just before I speak, just on something different, just on the back of what Tony said, there is a group, there's a large group, and I think my MP, Alex Sobel's involved in that group, I think, and it's something that as in the booths and internal exclusions, and that's something that we're covering at the next NEU OGM as well, because it is a huge issue. Anyway, I just wanted to come back to curriculum, because I think having a curriculum that's fit for purpose, that children see as being relevant, enjoyable, and as relevant in terms of their future work, I think that's going to make a huge difference. I mean, notwithstanding there are some children who are not in school or not going to school because of real complexities, but even if there are those complexities, if school is a place where you can go, where there are enough staff to support you, and where the curriculum is up to date and current for the time that we live in, I think even some of those children with all of those complexities are more likely to be in school. And just to say, the education unions are working, including the NEU, working really closely with the government on changing that curriculum, improving it. I mean, we want it to be faster and further, but I think it really is something that needs to happen and will have an impact, because as it stands at the moment with the EBAC, schools are under pressure to do the traditional subjects, and yet there is a place for the traditional subjects, but if they're not the ones you want to do, and they're not the most current subjects, I'm not disregarding the importance of them, then if there's not those possibilities for you in school, then it's maybe not a place you want to be.
Julie.
Yeah, I would completely concur with what Helen's just said. And these are the conversations, reassuringly, that we are having in the city with our education colleagues, you know, because actually it's a challenge for all of us. You know, it's a challenge as much for our colleagues working in schools, our teachers, our non-teaching assistants, you know, who want and are struggling really, you know, to meet the individual needs of children, when actually the curriculum really is not fit for purpose for children in 2025. I think I've mentioned before at Scrutiny, when I've had the pleasure, you know, whether it's to go to Catch, whether it's to go to our college in terms of the 14 to 16 academy that they have, you know, these are children who are not currently in school, you know, and they're receiving their education elsewhere. And actually, they are the most articulate, gifted children that I've met. You know, you sit with the children and you think you are going to be the entrepreneurs, you know, of the future. So there's something wrong, you know, if actually our current system cannot meet the needs of these children. But what's really reassuring is that, you know, these are absolutely the conversations that we are having with, you know, as I've said, education leaders right across the city, and an absolute commitment, again, to do differently. But it's a system. It's a whole system approach, you know. And when I talk about the system, I talk about parents, carers, you know, the number of children now, you know, who do have neurodiversity, who do have additional needs, you know, and you know, their needs are not being met in the current system, and we've got to collectively own that, and we are in Leeds.
Hello, Sir Helen. No, okay. Very much for coming, Helen. See you again next time. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. Building on a point earlier in terms of children looked after, children on child protection orders and child in need plans. So obviously the number on child protection orders is reduced slightly by 8 over the Q1 25, but the number of child in need plans has gone up 113. Could officers just please detail what's the difference in terms of the offer available for a child on either, in terms of access to family hubs and support services?
So the nature of the plan, so the difference between a child protection plan, a child in need plan, a child protection plan, a child looked after plan is the status of the child. So for a child to be subject to a child protection plan, and many years ago it was referred to as a child protection register, they have to be assessed as at risk of significant harm. And that might be risk from within the home. It might be a level of risk from outside the home. So that might be around child exploitation. So the name of the plan, if you like, or the identity of the plan is about the level of risk and need. Under the Children Act, there's definitions for Section 47, which is child protection, and also Section 17, which is child in need. And under the reforms, we talk about family help, which is early help, and child in need together. And as I mentioned earlier, pathways. In relation to support and access to support, that will be about the child and family circumstances. So for example, there might be a family might need parenting support. And that might be a family who are subject to child protection plan. It might be where there's a child in need plan. It might also be where there's a looked after plan, and part of reunification is support around parenting. So I think that that's a more helpful way of looking at support available. The name of the plan is by definition under the Children Act, and where the child's assessment fits in, if that helps.
Julie?
Yeah, I think the point that Farah makes there is really important in terms of, it's about individual assessed needs. So where we undertake, whether a child's subject to a child in need plan, a child protection plan, whether the child's looked after, it's about looking at the individual needs and circumstances of that child. And the plan is built around and is tailored to respond to those needs. It's a positive in Leeds that we have seen a decrease in children subject to child protection plans and an increase in some ways of children subject to child in need, because what that evidence is that we are able to de-escalate. So when a child has been subject to child protection plan, that we can de-escalate because we're putting in the right support and effective support for children to a SIN plan, or actually we are avoiding issues, challenges, concerns escalating to the point where a child needs to move from a child in need plan to a child protection plan. I think the other important thing in relation to child in need plan is that it's voluntary, so it's really dependent on families working with the local authority, and this is the whole focus of the national reform, which is to reduce unnecessary statutory intrusive intervention into children's lives, and actually to move more to a voluntary relationship with children and families where, as Farah said, we are providing support to the majority of families who are struggling in adversity. They don't require that statutory intervention. What they need is what I would call good old-fashioned family support. So the fact that actually we are de-escalating children safely, and again a whole quality assurance process around that safely, with oversight of social workers and others. This is about the national reform. This is about rebalancing the children's social care system, and we're evidencing that in Leeds.
Follow up, Brian.
So is there I think I'm hearing there's a strategy, to, albeit safely, to try and keep children on children need plans rather than escalate to, obviously if it's needed, but is that an actual strategy then to keep them on child need plans in order to maintain service provision?
It's not about maintaining service provision, but it's about ensuring that children are not subject to unnecessary statutory intervention. And the Josh McAllister review, and I'd urge everybody to read the Josh McAllister review if you haven't read that already, and this is what's driven the national government reforms. What that identified was that too many children were subject to statutory intervention when it wasn't necessary. And actually, so the cost of that statutory intervention, the cost to families, in terms of intrusive intervention, when actually, what they need is family support, is set out in that review. The evidence is there, the research is there to back up that review. The positive thing is, we've been on that journey in Leeds since 2010. So the fact that we've got one of the biggest family group conferencing services in the city, the fact that we've got kinship service, the fact that we've gone from 3 family hubs to 7 family hubs, that we continue to invest in family help, because we know, you know, that's going to get the best outcomes for children, you know, and in turn it does affect, I suppose, the financial, sustainability as well of the local authority. The two go hand in hand. We want the right outcomes for children. We don't want to have unnecessary statutory intervention, where it's not required. That's not what we're about.
Thanks, Julie. Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, so my question really is about the increase in the numbers of children who have had an EHCP, which is really very welcome. However, I think there's probably, ironically, a knock-on effect in the sense that although we have a falling birth rate, I think we have an increased number of children with EHC plans, and many of the children that I'm aware of as a SEND governor in a primary school, and also doing appeals yesterday for children who want to go into Roundhay Primary School, is that the needs of those children are much higher and require probably one-to-one attention, and because of their additional needs, but also that the school will have classrooms of 30, and how do you fit in a classroom of fit for 30 when you have extra one-to-one resources in the schools? So I think there's a whole issue there that I think hopefully we'll be able to look at later in the year, but perhaps give some attention as to how we actually cope with that extra demand and meet the needs of those children with additional needs.
Yeah. Julie.
Yeah. Absolutely, Councillor Jenkins. And I think, you know, what you've just sort of described in some ways, you know, reflects, again, the broken system that we've got at a national level, you know, and that has been acknowledged and recognised by government. You know, we've been advised, you know, that we to expect, the government really to set out its reforms in relation to SEND in the autumn term, and that's both in terms of I suppose the system that we have in terms of funding resources to support children with SEND, but also the whole, you know, the EHCP process, our focus, as we've described, in terms of the curriculum, in terms of, you know, having children in mainstream schools, keeping children in mainstream schools where that's possible. But actually, what does that need? You know, what do we need to put in place in order for that to happen? So we're really, you know, looking forward to hearing in the autumn, you know, what those reforms are going to be. But everybody's very, very clear that the current system is not working. You know, and to be honest, you know, if we think about the amount of expenditure, you know, which currently is, I suppose, supporting the EHCP process, you know, you have to ask the question, if that resource actually was being directed towards early intervention and prevention, if that resource was being directed to schools, you know, to frontline staff, to families that are crying out for family support and family help in the way that we've just described, you know, would that be resulting in better outcomes for children? And I believe it would.
Follow? No? Okay, thanks, Julie. Maria.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. The children that are looked after, how many are out of area, and are there any plans to try and bring them children back into area? And also, a couple of times you've mentioned trauma within the children. When they are placed in children's homes, foster cares, are there any ongoing services with them children to address their trauma? Because I know you've mentioned parenting support, but still these children have significantly been damaged by trauma, before they've got into foster care or before they've got into a children's home. What are we doing to support them children with that trauma?
I'll come back, Maria, in terms of your first question. Farah might want to come in terms of trauma and all of the work that we're doing to be a trauma-informed city. We have relatively few, actually, children in comparison to other local authorities who are placed, you know, outside of the city and also placed in external residential. We're doing an awful lot to return Leeds children to Leeds, and that's a central focus of what we call our sufficiency strategy. So every local authority has to have a sufficiency strategy, and essentially that is about us having a strategy to ensure that we have got the right mix, the right type, the right variety of placements for children in order to meet the different needs of children in the city. So, part of our sufficiency strategy, and again, it's about the local authority investment into that strategy, has been, as an example, around our small group living homes. So we previously had 10 children's homes in the city. We've moved to 18, and we will move to 24. And what that's enabled us to do is to begin to bring children back from external placements into Leeds, into our small group living homes. But we haven't stopped there, because we don't ever, where it's possible, we don't want to see residential care as a final destination for children. And that's where, as an example, the investment that we've put into our reunification team has supported the children to move back from external residential into our small group living homes, but then to move again back to be placed with family or extended family. Thinking about our foster care, so the work that we've done to increase the number of foster carers who have got specific expertise in working with adolescents, because we know that that's a particular challenge in the city because of our growth in adolescence. The focus that we have, we're just about to purchase a home which will be for parent-child provision. So where we have got a parent, child where they're in proceedings, and there's a risk that child might be removed. Quite often in court, the judge will request a parent-child assessment, so that we can understand the parenting capacity. We've never had a resource in Leeds for that, so that's required those parents, those children, and often it can be quite young parents, to actually move away from Leeds, to move away perhaps from a support network that they've got. So, I am absolutely delighted, because I can remember having this conversation 7 years ago, saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had that provision in Leeds? We have a futures service in Leeds which works with young parents who've previously had a child removed, and because they work so closely with those young people, and those young people have been able to say, look, if I'd have had that would have made the difference. If somebody had treated me like this, that would have made a difference. So all of that learning and that practice wisdom will feed into the the home that we are now developing in Leeds, to have those parents and those children stay in Leeds. So that's a little flavour, I suppose, of the work that we're doing to bring those children back to Leeds. And this is innovation. This is best practice at a time when, as a local authority and a city, we've got our financial challenges. The fact that we've still got that corporate and that political support, to continue to invest in the areas that we need to, is we should be very, very proud of. I'll hand over to Farah just to talk about the therapeutic work that we do.
Thank you, Maria. What we know is that children's behaviours are a manifestation of trauma, and children coming into care, so the trauma of being separated from family, but also very early life trauma or trauma in later life does affect them. So the work we're in very close discussions with our health colleagues in looking at all children coming into our care, recognising that all children coming into our care have experienced a level of trauma, and really understanding, almost assessing where they're at in relation to their journey, how that trauma will impact on them, and then looking at around them what support the team around that child will need. So school, foster carers, residential staff, family, what support they will need to be able to really provide stability. So our focus is on stable homes, be that with family, be that in foster care, be that in residential. And what we would want is all children, if they can't live at home, to live in a family setting. That would be our aim, that children live in a family setting. So those discussions with health have been really helpful, and we're looking at how we can align our services better in that preventative trauma space. We've got an extensive therapeutic social work team, and Most of their work is with our children looked after and older children, care leavers in particular, because what we know is, that's a really vulnerable cohort. And so we're building on the capacity of that team, working with health colleagues around clinical psychology support, etc., to really look at how we provide partnership supervision for that team around the child. We've got a lot of work to do in that space, but we've got a lot of good practice to build on as well. There is particular cohorts of children. There are particular cohorts that are more vulnerable, so children who are exposed to violence, children who children who are adopted, who come with that very early life experiences. And so what we want to do is focus on particular cohorts as well, adolescents within that, and identify the children that we know are more likely to have family breakdown of placements, move around, because when we know that their outcomes as young adults, as parents, will be affected by that trauma. So it is we're developing a trauma pathway, and that's informed by listening to the voices of children, of families, but also what we understand about those children coming into care.
Follow up, Maria?
So there's nothing in place for them children in care now? Is that what we're saying? It's all building?
So the services we have, we've got the therapeutic team, we've got the therapeutic social work team, we have, so this is the local authority services, but we also, obviously, there are health services as well. We have futures that Julie mentioned, we have we have MST teams, we have the SAFE project that work with children exploited. So we do have different services that work specifically around dealing with trauma. What we want is to build on that, so that we look at all children entering care and where they're at as a partnership approach. And we have mentioned previously in these meetings, but also the reforms are about family help. And we believe that you can't do family help without having a trauma offer and understanding trauma from an earlier stage. So it's developing and building on those services.
Follow up, Maria? Sorry, Julie.
It's all right, it's okay. What we've got is we've got a good range of services at the moment which are directed towards a therapeutic offer and responding to trauma in children. But equally what we recognise is that we need to continue to do better. We continue to improve on that. It's really reassuring, as an example, that the conversations that we're having with our health and ICB partners at the moment in the city, right across the city, is we've got a whole range of potential priorities. So it's really, really important that, given where we're at, that we need to really sort of target some of our resource. And two of the key priorities that have been identified are children with SEND, and also our children looked after. So as a system, how are we responding to the needs in particular of children with SEND and children looked after? And if I give you an example, Maria, in terms of one of our small group living homes, a number of our small group living homes actually, where we've been able to bring children back from external residential placements into our small group living homes, we've only been able to do that by having a multidisciplinary team around the child. So Farah and I were out visiting a children's home a few months ago, where we had a child who's been returned from external residential. She's been in a number of placements who really were unable to meet her needs. We were able to bring her back to Leeds into one of our own homes because we had CAMS professionals, multidisciplinary mental health professionals in the home. Farah and I saw it in action, working with our own staff to be able to respond. And that was one child, one child in one of our homes with a intense, highly experienced, multidisciplinary team working around her. And this is the model really that we want to build on in the future. It's got to be about health, ICB, children's social care, education as well, working collectively as a system to wrap around these children to meet their individual needs. So we have a lot, but we want to go further. We really, we've got a vision in a sense around what we want that care to be in Leeds.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if I'm explaining myself right. The children that are in residential homes now, are they all receiving some sort of therapeutic support now, rather than just being in a children's home? Do we send in people to do therapeutic work with them children in order to get them back home?
Yeah, we do, Maria. We do, and that will come in. It will look differently, you know. So, as an example, some of the provision where children are placed outside of the city, that will be delivered through that provision itself, you know. So they may have specialist provision attached. You know, it could be a residential boarding school, it could be a residential children's home. They will also access camps provision within the own local authority boundary area where the child's placed. We may commission additional provision. Again, it goes back to the individual need of the child and us undertaking an individual assessment of child and then agreeing what that package of support is going to be for the child. And it can be delivered by different individuals, different organisations, different professionals.
But yeah, to answer your question, if they're in one of our residential homes, the young person will be receiving trauma-informed therapy. Of differing types. Also, some of our homes are opening that we don't take. We have children that would have had to have gone external, but do not have to anymore because we have the specialised residential homes for them where they get very high quality care and all that support around them, rather than them having to go into the city, and it's out of the city. And that is of benefit to the child and obviously to the budget as well. But and also it's not always appropriate. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's not appropriate that the child goes home for their own. Yeah. So, but we would want them to be in as a family type setting as possible, and would always work towards that.
Thanks, Helen. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask about the NEAT figures, because they don't seem to be looking very positive, really. And ever since I came on Scrutiny for Children's Services, the NEAT figures have always been an issue. And then just following on from what was said, I think, did you mention CAMS, Julie? Because I just wondered what the waiting time was on the CAMS waiting list, because it's not been... It's got longer rather than a shorter time span, if I remember correctly. So I just wondered how long those children who need CAMS are now having to wait before that service is provided. Thank you.
What was your first point of your question, Councillor Renshaw, again?
NEAT.
It was NEAT, yeah. So, in terms of NEAT, I think as Chris has set out, I think we've got to see this, I suppose, in the context of the demographics in the city. You know, so I suppose we need to highlight the fact that the growth that we've had in the overall child population and the growth that we have had in adolescents in the city. So I think we've got to look at these figures in that context, you know, as a large core city and the increase in adolescents in the city. I think then on top of that, there's the correlation between the fact that actually that growth has taken place to the largest extent in our areas of highest deprivation. You know, and actually if I say that, you know, our rate per 10,000, so that's the number of children that we have in care per 10,000 of the child population in Leeds, that in our areas, some of our areas of greatest deprivation, that doubles. So so you see there's a direct correlation between children living in diversity and poverty and the need for them to become looked after. Now, as we've just discussed, you know, the journey for a child to become looked after at times can be quite immediate, you know, if a child has suffered significant harm. But equally, it can be a journey in terms of it might be that a child's subject to a child need plan, it might be that escalates to a child protection plan. So there's something there. So the fact that that almost doubles in our areas of highest deprivation, I suppose, highlights, again, some of the challenges that we've got in a big core city. So in some ways, the fact that we've had an increase in NEAT, you know, in some ways you might say is to be expected to a certain extent, not that we're ever complacent about that at all. the reassuring thing is, as Chris highlighted, is that actually, in some ways, you know, the fact that we now know, you know, so our figures in terms of not known, you know, that we now know more of those children, you know, is really, really, really important. When I moved into the director post, and I suppose previously having been responsible for children's social care and then with the responsibility of education, one of the things that I did really, really early on was to set up an arrangement where we seconded Andrea from the college into the local authority. And that's because I wanted to have a really, really clear, neat strategy. I was at an event a fortnight ago with education training providers from across the city coming together to talk about our neat strategy, our post-16 strategy, and it was a fantastic. We had the DFE there. You know, I think what was reported back really from some of the private providers and others that were there was that it's not their experience in other local authorities where the local authorities pulling the providers together to have that conversation. The very fact, you know, I think at the previous scrutiny where we were able to talk about the £10 million additional investment which has come into Leeds, you know, only to Manchester and Leeds to focus on those vocational qualifications, you know, because, and again, in some ways it goes back to the whole conversation that we've had about the curriculum and, you know, and attendance, because actually, you know, if you know, I think I was a vocational learner myself, you know, I didn't go to university until I was 26 and I had 2 children under 5 and I needed to be learning about something and applying it at the same time, you know, so the fact that we're going to be able to increase, you know, some of those vocational offer within the city all comes into this neat strategy. So we are a big city. We have got improvement to make in terms of neat. You know, we're clear about that, but we've got a really clear strategy around that. It's an ambition. It's up there in terms of our obsessions, our 3 obsessions. And I think it's really reassuring that we're not doing that in isolation. We've got a really firm partnership around that in the city.
Follow.
I welcome the fact that there's the investment, but if transport is one of the major issues, our people on the outer south, like the area that I represent, supposed to get into the city centre in order to engage with education, employment and training.
A part of that conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago was around having more bases around the city, and that is that's a very clear need that was said. Also, Leeds City College do, as I'd mentioned in that in the meeting we have, bursaries and they provide free travel, but also the former chair, and I'm sure this chair will be supportive as well, and I have written to the West Yorkshire Mayor to ask for consideration of free travel for 16 to 19-year-olds. So we are very much working on that as an issue, because we are geographically quite a large city, and although it's very efficient to have colleges in one place and all your staff in one place, etc., or in as few places as possible, it's also quite difficult for young people to move about. So yes, it is an ongoing conversation. If I could just add to the neat thing, because obviously it's a sticky problem, and Julie's absolutely right. So I asked Rosemary and our brilliant team and to actually break it down. So 5 years ago we had under 16,000 learners, 16 plus. And we had 1,300 neat and not known. Now, the neat figure's gone up, but that's a positive thing because our not known has come down. But that's the joint figure. 5 years later, we've got 19,500 learners, so 3,000 more, over 3,000 more, and we've got 1,700 neat. So 3,000 more learners and 400 more neat and not knowns. So there's been an awful lot of work done with that cohort, and an investment in getting them places and getting them places in education and employment. So although it's still sticky percentage-wise, there's been an awful lot of work gone in, and we are working really, really hard and to make sure that everyone has a place when they leave school. Oh, and there's another thing about attendance, and that the conversation we just had about children and young people who are not attending are more likely to end up neat because they're not attending school, so the likelihood of them then going on to something post-16 is vastly reduced. So if we sort out attendance, we're more likely to reduce the neat figures as well.
Can I just ask them, will they finish up in the neat figures or they're not known?
If we know them, they're in the neat figures. If we don't know where they are, then they're in the not known. Yeah.
Shall I come back on the question about CAMS?
Very quickly, Julie.
Okay, so just to say that, again, this is a national issue. If I'm being honest, I can't really remember a time in my professional career when there's not been, concerns about waiting times with CAMS, sadly. Again, we're working really closely with our ICB. We've now got our provider collaborative group set up in Leeds, given that the announced changes in terms of the ICB. I sit on that provider collaborative group, so the voice of children and families in this city is absolutely the focus of that. We're really looking as a system about, so how do we support children who are waiting for a CAMS system? Actually, what is the offer to those children? And that's where, our cluster support in terms of early intervention, our commission services, the Children's Society as an example, the fact that we have expanded our family hubs, the fact that we've got MST as an example, multi-systemic therapy, who really work to a clinical evidence-based model. It's about ensuring that where children are waiting, that actually we can be providing the support, so that they can make progress in the meantime. But we can't shy away from the fact that there is a national issue in terms of CAMS waiting times.
Thanks, Julie. We've reached the end of that item. The recommendation is that the board consider and comment on the information contained in the report and appendices, noting the assurance provided and considering if any additional information or further scrutiny work would be of benefit. I think we've gone into that in some considerable detail. I'm happy to propose that. Do we have a seconder? All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. On to item number 12, which is the Children's Centre review. Who wants to start on this one?
I'll go first, and I'll be really. I'm mindful of time. Okay. So this report sets out the rationale for the Children's Centre's review, including the need to ensure that services remain sustainable, accessible and responsive to the needs of family and with young children in 2025. It also highlights the importance of aligning provision with the best start in life strategy and the wider ambitions of the Children and Young People's Plan. So I'll take the report as read, and shall we move on to questions?
Thanks very much indeed, Councillor Hayden. Vicky, do you want to get us off?
Not at this time really. It's really an opportunity for the board to raise, kind of highlight the areas that they particularly want us to focus on within the consultation that's about to commence.
Any other officer would like to start this off? Quite happy with Councillor Hayden's introduction.
Just very quickly, just to set some context. So this effectively is pre-decision scrutiny, even though we've taken it just to executive board. So what we wanted to do was bring it to you so that we could capture your views, feed that into the consultation, and then launch the consultation. So we've got a small window of seeking to do that.
Thanks, Phil. I was just going to say that myself. It was brought to the executive board last week. Does anyone just want to give us a brief overview of what the executive board sort of said? Or are you quite happy to go into questions and comments?
I think broadly executive board endorsed the proposal to go out to consult. There were obviously concerns about making sure that that consultation was real and meaningful, that we made every opportunity to reach out to communities. I think there's a sense that we really, really value children's centres, but there is an opportunity to consider what the service needs to look like moving into the future. There are issues about focusing on the service delivery rather than the physicality of the buildings and the locations. And I think it was genuinely this is an opportunity that we should grasp. Needs to link into some of the stuff we've been speaking about earlier, the wider family help issues, the sort of changes in relation to social care more generally, and that focus on early intervention and prevention activities of which children's centres will form a part.
Thanks, Phil.
Sorry, if I could just add that there will be every ward member across the city will be consulted, and part of the consultation there'll be open consultations, and obviously this is part of the pre-consultation, but when it's launched there will be opportunities for ward members, and there will be kind of information to do with just your ward, as it were. So those conversations will take part at a very local level with all ward members.
You read my mind, Councillor Hayden. I was just going to raise a couple of issues round about the consultation of this particular sort of issue, which could prove contentious, I would think, with a number of families across the city. And given the difficulties we've experienced over Queensway School, then obviously we'll be keeping a fairly close eye on how the consultation actually goes. Not to be answered this particular point, but I understand the financial logic of what you're trying to do, given the financial situation in the council. The reduction of the number of groups that the children's centres are in and the number of buildings from which they're going to work out, fully understand the financial issues sort of there. I didn't see anything in the paper, although I may have missed it, about the reduction or a suggested or possible reduction in the number of children's centres. I did mention it very briefly to Vicky a week last Monday, I think it was. And I just wondered where that would figure when the consultation actually comes up, if it isn't in the papers. Not for now, I'd much prefer for members to ask their questions and comments.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was. I think there's the fact that we've got so many children's centres in Leeds is extremely positive and something that I'm certainly very proud of, and I think we should all be proud of. But I recognise the challenge around birth rates, which has been highlighted in my area, but it's an issue across the city. I think one of the thoughts I had, and thinking about the Children's Centre in Airborough, but thinking about other ones around the city, is that it is right that we really focus on where there are the highest levels of need. But I would make a plea in this that we also think about places which are maybe further down some of the tables which have been presented, which don't come at the top, but nevertheless, so areas like mine and some of the outer areas, I imagine Councillor Flynn's area and others, where the children's centres play a really important role, but particularly for families who might not have the ability to get elsewhere. Even if somewhere looks close on a map, there may not be the bus connections if they don't have access to a car, and so I think it's just to urge that that's really taken into account, and particularly the distance from other services, as well as all the other things that are considered, such as population and deprivation. Can we make sure that the needs of outer areas are considered? The only other thing to say as well is that I think those first 1,000 days are so important in a child's life, and one of the things I was very struck with when I visited the Children's Airborough Children's Centre recently was when they talked about the range of children. So we do want to focus on the children with the highest levels of need, but it's also important that children have chance to interact with other children from different backgrounds. And so one of the things they said to me is that it wasn't only children For example, around Queensway, in the case of in the case of my ward, Councillor Downs' ward as well. But also there were children who were coming from further afield, including children who were living up on Hawksworth Moor, for example. And I think it's a really valuable resource where children from very different backgrounds can come together, and I think we need to see that as part of the review as well, having opportunities for different children to come together, because ultimately that's the kind of city and the kind of country that we want to live in, where people from different backgrounds interact. And so I do think there's an opportunity here when it comes to children's centres moving forward to really incorporate that into the strategy. Thank you.
Vicky?
Thank you. Those are really helpful points, and we are looking at that. And I think your sort of first point about travel, in our sort of phase one, our sort of discovery phase, and we engaged with just short of 3,000 parents. That was one of the questions. How do you get to your children's centre at the moment? And we were quite surprised about the high number that actually used a car as opposed to walking or a bus. Bus was actually really low. That might tell us something else around, transport networks, but that's absolutely vital. We can break that information down, and we'll be asking that question again as part of this more formal public consultation on the locality. How do you get, which children's centre do you access services currently? How do you get there? And what would the impact be, if that's a really key element of that consultation. And I think the second part is around that, what you're describing is the universal offer, isn't it? It's around that social, there's a social element, not necessarily kind of the intensive services or support that some families do receive through children's centres, but that opportunity to meet like-minded people. And I think that is really around us as part of that consultation, engaging with our partners and our stakeholders around, do we necessarily need to directly deliver some of those? So within the papers and the outcomes of the engagement, one of the most used kind of type of activity is the play and stay groups, and that is around just parents and children being able to come together. So is there something around part of that consultation? We'll be talking to key stakeholders, particularly third sector partners or schools or other venues around maybe co-delivering some of that work. So it's not necessarily stopping it, and that is certainly on our radar in terms of the importance.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the surveys, there were 2 surveys being taken between 19th of March and 22nd of April 2025. My question is, you received 2,776 surveys back. How many were sent out? That's 1, 2 families survey, and then you did a professional survey, received 255. And there's no figures in there how many we send out. And can you just explore the way and the method we use to clear that information as well, please?
Yeah, so the way that we promoted the survey, it wasn't necessarily kind of sending it out directly, so there wasn't, I can't provide that figure. We just promoted the opportunity online through a whole variety of ways. It was on our own Leeds.gov website. It was promoted through all our children's centres and our networks. So, for example, our 0 to 19 colleagues, our health colleagues, as well as all other services, to encourage families to. Where families, there were also hard copies, where children's centre staff teams could support families to and stakeholders to answer, to complete those where they didn't have perhaps access to digital methods. In terms of collating, the actual survey was designed by our specialist colleagues in another directorate, so that was quite easy. They were able to sort of devise and develop that survey in order for us to be able to kind of collate it in a meaningful way. But running alongside that, as it also said, we had a number of face-to-face engagement sessions, which were much more, an opportunity for additional information to be gathered.
There was also the members' session as well, which was online. Yeah, that was very well attended cross-party. So, huge thanks for that.
Come back to
Carl.
Yeah, just briefly, thank you, Vicky and Helen. To follow up, as you know, the ward I represent and the ward we've got 2 centres there as well. I think a lot of people don't have the access for online and lack of computer in those areas. Is there any way we can do a physically face-to-face consultation as well?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Khan. I think sort of what Vicky's articulated is some of the engagement that was done to gather views about the service as it currently is. Obviously, we want to maximise how we reach people within communities. So within the children's centres themselves, there will be opportunities for people to engage with staff within the children's centres. If they're not digitally engaged or they find it difficult to complete online information, they will have the opportunity to complete information at the children's centre settings themselves. The other thing that we'll be running is drop-in sessions, and we do have a mixture of online and in person, hopefully, and just to sort of encompass some of that conversation and the richness in that conversation as well, through various communities. What we're also doing as well is seeking support through our locality colleagues within safer, stronger communities, so that they can share information across their networks. And so what we're seeking to do is to engage with some of the more seldom heard communities, and to promote the consultation within those communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. After that, I think councillors are picking up on the interest that board members have in consultation in every sort of aspect. If you'd been here a bit earlier, you'd have heard a lot more about it sort of too. Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Chair. I made this point in a private briefing, but I'll make it here so it's captured. It's just in the outer areas, when we're thinking about finance resources, I think it needs to be captured that the distance of travelling from the outer areas to essentially it really is not just a financial pressure for the users, it's one for staff. And it's one reason why, on a slightly partisan point, the last government had for rural councils what was called a rural supports grant, which has now been removed. It recognises that the distance equates to cost. It costs people more to move around. So the only observation or request really is, as we're thinking about breaking this down to geographical areas, that cannot equate to the same funding formula for each geographic area, because we're going to have to recognise, as we do with deprivation element funding, there also needs to be a rural element funding. That it costs more for staff to get around, i.e. they can't do more with less, or they can do less with the same. So can we please capture that?
Julie?
Yeah, well, absolutely happy, and I think this is the purpose really of entering into the next, the consultation phase, where we can get the feedback in terms of stakeholders right across the city about the areas that they want us to focus on. I think it also, there's something about, I suppose, the importance of us using our existing resource, and the point that Vicky made in terms of our universal resource. So if you think about our Best Start and Beyond strategy, that's involving health visitors, again, schools, GP practices, children's social care. So again, it's looking to see where some of those universal services actually will be located across the city, and how we're maximising the resource that we've got to best effect.
There's also the work around demographics, and Sure Starts, if I can be partisan, were set up and brilliantly and very, very effective in 2006, 2008 by a Labour government. And it's but the world has moved on, people have moved, communities have moved around, as I mentioned earlier. So you don't have the same number of families living in an area, so therefore that point about people having to use cars, are our children's centres actually in the best place geographically? Because the city's a very different place to where it was 20 years ago. So all of that will be captured as to where families are living now, and the transport needs and all of that in this consultation stage. And Councillor Khan, we had one of our face-to-face in terms of the professionals and the Vironary Centre, which is a fabulous resource in your ward.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Follow, Councillor Stevenson? No? Okay. Councillor Goodall.
Thank you, Chair. I think there was an important point made at the separate members' meeting that we had that was about people who are kind of in pockets of low-income households in the more affluent areas feeling even more isolated than they might if they were in an area where a lot of other people were in a low-income household. So I think it's really important that that is taken into account as part of this. The other thing I was going to say, which Councillor Hayden kind of mentioned it, was given this nostalgia for Sure Start, is there any sign that there might be more funding from the government? Because, you know, if we're doing this now and then we suddenly get more funding, are we going to be able to kind of claw that back, and are we lobbying for that extra funding?
It's not about lobbying. The direction of travel with this government into the Children's Wellbeing Act is absolutely for family help and for early intervention. Now, whether that is, but much more integrated. So we have Best Start and the first 1,000 days, but actually what we've started in the city is Best Start and beyond, right up until the end of primary school, acknowledging how important those early years are. And the direction of travel with the government is integration of services. So we may not have a children's centre in a particular area because Sure Start was brilliant, but we need, and they've always, like Vicky mentioned, the 0 to 19 team, etc. But very much the direction of travel with the government is these neighbourhood kind of hubs, health hubs, and how do we integrate children into those more integrated services, so that actually, you know, it's all there for you, whatever age you are. And I do love what we've done in a city in Airborough, to go back to Airborough, and we're spending a lot of time in Airborough this meeting. But Airborough Leisure Centre, which has the library inside it now, so you can go and get a book at 10 o'clock at night. There aren't staff there, but you can. And then the children's, all the services around that. And that's it's a much more cost efficient model, but it's much more effective for people as well, that they have all the services together.
Follow up, Councillor Goodall.
Just a minor point that page 114 says Headingley Children's Centre doesn't have a building. I'm not quite sure what constitutes a building, but there is now a type of building in Headingley Children's Centre, just to note on the report.
There is a range around the city, and some of them are purpose-built, some of them are not. A lot are in schools. So in my ward, I don't have a children's centre. I have 3 areas of 3 schools. Yes, and I'm glad to hear it's got a building, but it's about how we use our buildings as well, like libraries and things like that. Yeah, definitely.
Hayden. Okay now, Councillor Goodall, yeah? Councillor Jones.
I thought you were before me.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
Well, first of all, I think we should acknowledge that Leeds has kept most of its services, despite the decimation that's taken place in the last 14 years. And yes, that's a political point. But my concern is, how have we addressed this with the workforce? When I read on page 117, it looks as though people may be losing their job. And my other concern is some of our staff, when they see this, will be looking to jump quite quickly elsewhere and have the facility to do that. So I'm concerned about that. So what consultation has been said to staff, and have we involved the trade unions in that conversation? And have we been able to reassure the staff that their jobs will be kept wherever possible?
Yeah, we're actually working really closely with our trade union colleagues to support the staff, because change, it's not necessarily just about losing jobs, but it is around change, and that is really difficult and an anxious time, and particularly when your priority, your day-to-day work is around supporting children and families that are also going through a different time when you're feeling it yourself as well. So there we're putting a significant amount of support in to our own children's centre workforce, but also we're working really closely with our schools that we're currently commissioning around the needs of their staff, and we're working really closely with legal colleagues and HR colleagues around that to make sure that there's a smoother transition as possible for the staff, and that they're protected and supported, and that they have that they know where they can get some help if they need to while we're going through this period of change.
I'm happy to come in as well, just in terms of your point about jobs essentially, you know, and I suppose what we can't do is we can't preempt, as I know you know, the outcome of the consultation, but we're really, really mindful that in that the uncertainty, to be honest, and sometimes the uncertainty is worse than actually having a definitive outcome of a consultation. So again, we're really I was out in a children's centre about 4 weeks ago, talking to staff, talking to the manager, just about you know, how they were feeling about the whole situation. And I suppose, you know, the biggest commitment we can make is to be able to conduct the process in a way that we are involving them, we're compassionate, we're mindful of the impact on them, and that we try and move through it in as timely a way as possible so that people get the clarity, really, because I think that's often a key thing in these matters.
And Chair, if I can just add and say, obviously, that the Council has an established process in relation to managing staff redundancies, and that's the process that will be managing staff reductions. Sorry, there's a slip. And that process will be followed in accordance with the Council's agreed arrangements.
If that's what the consultation, but that's quite far down. We've got to have the consultation first with this funding formula to see what's needed in the city. But everything will be. But we've been talking to the trade unions for since January, haven't we? Yeah, and staff, and those 250 contributions were a lot were from staff. Yeah, not just around and they will be staff will be a key part of this consultation as well.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, follow up.
It would have been helpful if we had actually spoke to councillors as this came out, because I was made aware by a member of staff, and it would have been helpful. This is again coming back. Helen, I didn't know, unless I missed an email, and I'm sure my colleagues would have fetched it to me.
We've done a session. There was a member session on this proposed consultation, which was led by Vicky. You were invited to the open ones. The email survey was sent out to all councillors. It was a cross-member session, and I also came to Labour Group, and we talked about it. So that was months ago, and there was a dedicated session for members of council, which was attended very well by a cross-party. Which I thanked people for earlier. So this has been very well publicised and talked to with elected members of council since March time. What did come out was in December, January, when Dan Barton went to the school-led children's centres to advise that they were coming into the council. So all of the children's centres are now under one organisation, the council. In order to do this review, we couldn't have the situation where some children's centres were led by schools, but it hasn't changed as a children's centre. None of them have as yet. We're just starting the consultation now.
Thank you. All right. Councillor Jenkins, and my apologies for missing you before.
No, don't worry. This is about page 131 on SEND. So it's a paragraph on SEND which probably isn't very well. I thank you for the report, and you know you do a fantastic job, and so on. But in some ways, this paragraph doesn't tell us very much. Maybe it is somewhere else in 164 pages. I think I lost the will to live nearly by the end. But some of this is really quite important because the children with additional needs or from specific vulnerable groups, families with special educational needs and disabilities, asylum seekers, refugees, care leavers, but we don't really have any accurate figures, it says. And I'm particularly concerned that we need these sort of analysis for when children transition to primary school. So when you talk to SENCOs, they often tell me, well, my SENCO tells me there's a real gap between what's happened in the children's centre and the progression there to what's needed when they get to school. So some may be, quite different depending on the children's centre. So I just wondered, I don't want to create any extra work, but I just think it's a really important area to look at. Thank you.
Vicky? Yep.
Thanks. In terms of the accuracy of the figures, the challenges, obviously we're talking about 0 to 5-year-olds, so quite often there hasn't been an assessment at that stage. So actually it's by attending a children's centre, that's how we then identify the needs of that child. So in terms of this context and the formula, this was around, we're mindful of allocating a particular level of funding, particular children's centre based on numbers of children that we know have had an assessment, because that might not be a reflection of the number of children that need some additional support. I think in terms of the second, in terms of that's children's centres obviously provide the really focus on the family support and socialisation and kind of health needs of children rather than necessarily their formal kind of learning. And that's why we need to, as we move through this, a key stakeholder is our daycare providers and our early years providers, so that we can work hand in hand so the family support services that are based in children's centres can really support and encourage families take up appropriate childcare and early early years learning when it's appropriate for that family, and that can thrive in that and provide that support around transition rather than necessarily deliver that learning.
Could I just, we're about to be ejected from the building, or from the room anyway. We've just got one more, I think, councillor to ask questions here. Just bear in mind that we're holding up another meeting. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, I hope when you're looking at relocating buildings or relocating services that you're not just looking as the crow flies on a map, and you're taking into account the transport of families and young people, because one of the children's centres in my ward was put into share with a building in Beeston, and I've often questioned how people from Marsden and Robin Hood are going to get to Beeston. And I know that our other children's centre, people have not known when it was open, people have not known when it was closed, or what services it provided, yet the community paid for, I think it was Amanda Ash that was there at the time, and we had a presentation with all this equipment in a wonderful garden, and yet the people that raised that money have not known when that centre's been open. Why?
Vicky? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. And that's a really valid point, and I think that's really part of this review. Just it isn't around changing services, but it is around how do families find out about them, and when are they open, and when do families want children's centres open. I think it's important to link this to our wider locality asset, review within the authority, because it's not just about necessarily. That's not our primary aim about closing children's centres. It's about maximising the assets and the buildings that we have in our city, and it might be around what other services are appropriate and suitable to come into our children's centres so that they can be open much longer and they're used sort of much more efficiently so for the benefit of wider members of the community.
Happy with that? All right. Thanks very much indeed. Very quickly, Kate, yeah.
It was just to add, just obviously you've had quite a lot of members mentioning about transport, but I think I'd like to see as well when you're looking at the consultation outcomes that you consider sort of accessibility more generally in terms of how people actually use centres on the ground, because quite often people will drop a lot of these centres are school-based, and they'll drop their older children at school, and they'll then go on, they'll fit it in and around what they can manage, and also obviously parents or carers with children with additional needs. It's about the accessibility of it as well. If you're looking at sort of reducing the numbers of centres, really considering that as well as the transport links and those wider issues as well. Thank you.
I think there's something around actually taking the services to the people rather than getting them all to get on a bus or in a car and come to one place. What can we do? How can we redesign? The digital offer is going to be key to that as well. So parents work, but they might want to access something after work. And so digital gives us a real opportunity there. Going in, the footfall and the membership of Crossgates Library when it went into the shopping centre has grown exponentially because people can access it much more easily. So for all those reasons, this is a key opportunity to actually say, what do you need from us? And we'll come to you rather than... in Crossgates, our breastfeeding support happens in the local cafe, much nicer than in a lofty school hall with and I'm not denigrating anything, but and you can have a drink, which drinks are provided and things like that, and have a chat and have our children and families actually at the heart of the community rather than put in a building somewhere.
Okay, Kate? Yeah? All right. Thank you all very much indeed. That's brought us almost to the end of proceedings today. I'd just like to first of all thank Rob very much indeed for carrying me for the last 2 or 3 weeks and doing all the preparation, etc., etc. Nikki for a very clear exposition of the legal advice that we received over the Queensway schools business. To Julie, Helen, and all of the myriad, hundreds of staff, it appeared to me, from children and families that have been here today. Could you please pass on my thanks to each and every one of them for the very clear, explanations they gave to us. And last but not least, all the membership of the board for being gentle with me on my very first Scrutiny board. Thank you all very much indeed. Just one more item, which is the date of the next meeting, which is on the 23rd of July at 1:30 with a pre-meeting at 1:15. And on that note, thank you very much indeed.